Faites l'appel, s'il vous plaît, Madame le greffier.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Hélier.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Laurent.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Brelade.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de la Trinité.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Pierre.
Présent.
Madame le connétable de Saint-Martin.
Présente.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Jean.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Clément.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Grouville.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Ouen.
Présent.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Marie. Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Sauveur.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Southern. Madame le député Labbé.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Tadier. Monsieur le député Luce.
Présent.
Madame le député Dublé. Monsieur le député Morel. Madame le député Lehegara. Monsieur le député Ayer. Monsieur le député Ward.
Présent.
Madame le député Alves.
Présente.
Madame le député Gardner. Monsieur le député Ghost.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Farnham.
Présent.
Madame le député Moore. Monsieur le député Mezek.
Présent.
Monsieur le député Joseph. Monsieur le député Balash. Monsieur le député Coles. Madame le député Poré. Monsieur le député Wall. Madame le député Miles.
Présente.
Madame le député Scott.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Renouf. Madame le député Curtis. Madame le député Feltham.
Présente.
Madame le député Binet. Madame le député Jeune. Madame le député Miller.
Présente.
Madame le député Howell.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Binet. Monsieur le député Ferry.
Présent.
Madame le député Kovac.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Curtis. Madame le député Ward.
Présente.
Madame le député Wilson.
Présente.
Madame le député Stevenson.
Présente.
Monsieur le député Andrews.
Monsieur le doyen.
Notre aide soit au nom de Dieu qui a fait les cieux et la terre. Amen. Seigneur Dieu, Père éternel et tout-puissant, qui a établi le gouvernement et les puissances de la terre pour le règlement et pour la conduite du peuple, et qui nous a commandé d'avoir toujours pour but la gloire de ton saint nom. Nous te prions que te plaise de donner à cette assemblée le don de conseil et de prudence, d'unir les cœurs et les affections de tous ceux qui la composent, de la conduire tellement toi-même par ton Saint-Esprit que toute leur délibération est accompagnée de ta bénédiction. Réussis au bien et au soulagement du peuple qui ont de plus de mettre à leurs soins. Car nous t'en prions au nom et par les mérites de ton Fils bien-aimé Jésus-Christ, notre Seigneur, qui nous a enseigné à t'invoquer en disant: Notre Père, qui es aux cieux, ton nom soit sanctifié, ton règne vienne, ta volonté soit faite sur la terre comme au ciel. Donne-nous aujourd'hui notre pain quotidien, et nous pardonne nos offenses, comme nous pardonnons à ceux qui nous ont offensés. Et ne nous envoie pas en tentation, mais délivre-nous du mal, car à toi est la règne, la puissance et la gloire, au siècle des siècles. Amen.
Monsieur le connétable de Saint-Marie.
Defo.
Sir, beg your pardon. I believe the Constable of St Mary has remained away from the chamber because he has COVID. Or is...
Is my lad? John, yes. Yes, members, if he is marked Malad, he won't be able to join the link remotely later on. I think he wishes to join later on. Members content to mark him excused in the circumstances? Thank you very much.
Monsieur le Deputy Southern.
Présent.
Monsieur le Deputy Tadier. Madame le Deputy Doublé.
Deputy Dublé is malade.
Vous jurez que Madame le Deputy Doublé est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le Deputy Morale.
Defoe.
Madame le Deputy Gardner.
Deputy Gardner is also malade.
Vous jurez que Madame le Deputy Gardner est tellement indisposée qu'elle ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Madame le Deputy Moore.
Sir, Deputy Moore is out of the island on States business.
State's business.
Monsieur le Deputy Osoph.
Malad.
Vous jurez que Monsieur le Deputy Osoph est tellement indisposé qu'il ne peut pas assister aux états sans exposer sa santé. Monsieur le Deputy Coles.
Présent.
Madame le Deputy Jeune.
Les États constitués. Members will know that St Helier is twinned with the Ukrainian city of Mykolaiv, and I'd like members to give a warm welcome to a delegation from Mykolaiv in the chamber this morning. Thank you very much. We now move to the consolidated order paper. There's nothing under J or K, so we move on to public business. The first matter is La Colette Waste Management Site Development Plan P71, lodged by the Minister for Infrastructure. The main respondent is the chair of the Environmental, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. There are currently 2 amendments lodged, one by the Connétable of St Helier and one by the Minister. In order to establish whether or not the Minister's proposition can be read as amended, Connétable, are you pursuing your amendment?
So on the basis that the Minister is going in his opening speech to make a number of reassurances to the parish in respect of the speed with which the site will be made accessible to walkers and cyclists and the level of consultation and involvement he intends to make with the parish of St Helier, I'm prepared to withdraw my amendment. Thank you, sir. But I reserve the right to speak and vote against the proposition. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Connétable. Are members content for the... Well, first, Minister, do you wish your proposition to be amended as amended by your own amendment?
Please, sir.
And are members content for that to occur? Thank you very much. So I invite the greffier to read the proposition as amended by the amendment of the Minister.
The States are asked to decide whether they are of opinion, A, to support the short, medium-term plan for the continuation of the management and storage of hazardous waste and inert waste at the La Colette Waste Management Site, to include 1. A combined waste management approach for hazardous waste and inert soils under a La Colette Waste Management Site Development Plan as detailed in Drawing 22023-101. 2. The formation of the East Headland and South Headland by deposition of hazardous waste in cells to a maximum height, including capping, restoration soils and landscaping, of no more than 4.5 metres above the current maximum height of the East Headland. 3. The formation of the South Headland and West Headland by deposition of inert waste to a maximum height, including capping, restoration soils and landscaping, of no more than 4.5 metres above the current maximum height of the East Headland. 4. The landscaping restoration of the East Headland and South Headland and West Headland. 5. The creation of a publicly accessible coastal walk and cycle path with appropriate public amenities around the perimeter of the site once landscaping and restoration is complete. and developed in consideration of the safety zone limitations. And B, to request that prior to the next review of the island plan, the Minister for Infrastructure and the Minister for the Environment develop a long-term strategy for inert and hazardous waste management to include 1, changes to policy and supplementary planning guidance based on the waste hierarchy and with a strict focus on waste minimisation, and 2, identification of future sites for inert and hazardous waste management.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'm very conscious that it's a very busy week for the Assembly this week, so I shall endeavour to be as succinct as I can. That said, it's still a reasonably long and slightly tedious speech, sir, but I'd ask people to bear with me. I'm sure members will be aware of the recent history of and the saga surrounding the hazardous and inert waste areas at Loch Nonetheless, I think it'd probably be helpful to remind members of some of the longer-running history of the site. The Loch Reclamation Site Phase 2 was approved in October 1993. Then in January 1995, approval was obtained to fill the reclamation site with inert waste up to a level of the top of the breakwater. Further approval in September 1995 enabled filling the reclamation site with incinerator bottom ash and hazardous waste up to a height of the top of the breakwater, and this was increased again in 1996 to allow landscaping to create the North Mound to 10 metres above the breakwater. In July 2000, the Loch Development Framework was approved by the States Assembly, which contained 2 key components. 1, an area of reclaimed land to be used for superfilling, followed by landscaping, and 2, the storage of aggregate material. So this reinforces the point that Loch was designed and built for the purposes of waste management for Jersey, and that superfilling was intended expressly. So that's our starting point. Loch has been and is currently doing exactly what it was intended and designed to do. And the Bridging Island Plan has continued to support this approach, noting that this is in the best interest of the island and that extensions to existing waste management facilities are favoured over entirely new facilities on new sites. In the context of this proposition, sir, these 2 points are of great importance. Moving to more recent events, it's generally accepted that Loch has continued to fill faster than originally predicted, and this is also recognised in the Bridging Island Plan. Because of this, and as mentioned, a planning application was submitted in 2016 to enable continued superfilling of the hazardous waste area. This was refused recently, posing an immediate problem to the island and its essential management of hazardous waste. So we've taken on board the feedback from this refusal and have spent time developing a more holistic solution for waste management at Loch, which also considers inert waste and stockpiling. As a consequence, the proposition in basic terms aims to deliver the following: essential waste management facilities for the island, a restored and landscaped headland, and an area for public space. It also looks to extend the life of Loch by proposing work with the Minister for the Environment to develop and implement practical measures for minimising waste and to consider options for future sites for the disposal of residual waste. So obviously members are at liberty to make whatever they wish of this proposition, but I feel I have a responsibility to point out a number of other things, some glaringly obvious and others perhaps less so. Firstly, much of the material that we have to deal with relates to a time when we, as an island, were far less concerned about our environment. Indeed, one could go as far as to say a time when we were positively careless, sir. If there is any good news in this proposition, though, sir, it probably rests solely on the fact that in recent times our practices have changed, and as a consequence, the volume of hazardous waste will reduce significantly for future generations. And in the case of asbestos, the problem of continued supply will eventually disappear. Second, the historic waste and its ongoing production is not of the infrastructure department's making. However much we might be concerned about the location of its storage and the method of its ongoing management, we shouldn't have and don't deserve the luxury of simply expressing outrage, then standing back as if someone else is to blame. This waste belongs to each and every one of us, and as such we have to share responsibility for its disposal. Yes, the task has been delegated to the department, but we all need to be realistic about the options open to them. They're not superhuman, and they don't have any magic solutions available to them, sir. It may, and probably will be the case that future sites will be needed, but this will take many years and significant funding will be required to identify, plan and deliver them. I should also remind members that if we didn't use La Collette for waste management, we couldn't use it for a great deal else. That's simply because of the location of the fuel farm. That presence gives rise to specific safety zones that have been developed through extensive national and local analysis, and these dictate considerable limitations. In any event, the amended proposition seeks to ensure that the island continues to have an effective waste operation and to deliver benefit to the community through increased public access to amenity space. The original refusal cited insufficient details regarding restoration, landscaping and community benefit, and accordingly, the revised application, due for submission early in September, will include a comprehensive restoration plan developed in conjunction with planning and environmental professionals. And this will seek to create a 1 mile long coastal walk and cycle path around the perimeter of the site with other suitable public amenities. The landscaping of the headlands is essential to provide the best public experience and to ensure the waste operation is screened as much as possible by the creation of a continuous headland screen along the outer limits. For those who'd recently made speculative comparisons between the Waste Mound and Warnwell Point, I'm pleased to say that the newly proposed height of the former would sit some 31.5 metres lower than the latter. So, in response to comments from the previous unsuccessful application, this newly proposed headland height has been reduced from an increase of 10 metres on the original application to a mere 4.5 metres, and that's a reduction of some 55%. And based on the normal intake of volumes, this would still give us more than 3 years of additional storage at the current rate of infill, albeit this is not a great length of time to develop and embed longer-term solutions. However, if we can minimise the waste through behavioural change and better practice, then this 3 years could be significantly extended, hopefully to as much as 10. Also important to note is the fact that through the development of supplementary planning guidance and the future inclusion of the solid waste team as statutory consultees to the planning applications, and that was at the wise suggestion of Deputy Alex Curtis, sir, we'll have plenty of expert opinion on the approach to future developments, including their rationale, their waste targets, and assurance that the waste is minimised through design and site waste management plans. Thus, subject to the success of the proposition, it will soon be incumbent upon designers and developers to minimise waste as far as is reasonably practicable, and measures to enforce this requirement are already contained within our existing regulatory and policy framework. In terms of the hazardous waste, this may also involve some on-site treatment or remediation depending on the nature of the contamination. And in terms of inert waste, this could involve ensuring, through design, that excavated materials can be reused directly where on-site filling is required. So before concluding, it should be mentioned that however unfortunate it must be for the parish of St Helier to be the recipient of the island's hazardous waste, it is the only parish that has the ability to manage this level of waste safely in a specifically created area, suitably distanced from housing and the waterways that feed the island's reservoirs. And with this in mind, it does give rise to the question, where else would States members want the island's waste to go? In conclusion, sir, having visited the Granite Products Quarry, the Rhone Quarry, and the large quarried sandpit pond at St Wands, and having considered the various opportunities and constraints of the inert waste recycling pond, it's my firm opinion, and perhaps more importantly that of the professional waste team, that this proposition is our only sensible option for the foreseeable future. It's based on reducing the height and visual impact previously proposed and minimising the waste intake by designing out existing areas of hazardous waste where possible and ensuring careful on-site selection and separation where it isn't. Failure to support it would leave the planning panel with an unreasonable level of responsibility that would, in all probability, result in an imminent planning decision that would cause all construction and development work in the island to cease, and put the incinerator option at serious risk in the event that our ability to export incinerator bottom ash were to change. It could also mean no new hospital, no new schools, and no new homes, sir. So in these troubled times, to describe that as unwise would be a huge understatement. Finally, and for the avoidance of doubt, I'd like to repeat my commitment for the I&E department to consult with the parish of St Helier on all future planning applications for this site, and thank the Constable again for allowing the proposition to be debated in its simplest form. I'd also extend my thanks to Deputy Alex Curtis for the same reason and for the constructive dialogue that we've had over recent days. In withdrawing his amendment to my amendment, we've agreed that henceforth every effort should be made to use all waste areas, particularly the hazardous waste facility, as sparingly as possible, using every measure available to us to ensure the most intelligent approach is taken to extending the life of this now precious waste facility. We also have to balance the importance of its careful use with the need to ensure that our all-important construction industry continues to have the level of work that's required to remain successful and able to deliver the various critical developments that the island needs. This will undoubtedly involve consultation and engagement with all concerned, particularly in relation to the treatment of the hazardous waste, known to be in existence at the waterfront development. Especially in this regard, I look forward to working closely with Deputy Curtis, Constable Crowcroft and others to deliver the best possible outcome for the island. So I certainly hope that I've said sufficient for the Constable to be happy. If not, I'm quite happy to make further statements to that effect because I think we've both agreed on the path that we like to take. So I leave it in the hands of the Assembly and hope that all members can find it in themselves to approve this proposition. So thank you.
Minister, is the proposition seconded?
Yes, sir.
Mutard of St Helier.
Thank you, sir. So St Helier was never going to be as attractive from the sea as St Peterport is, though perhaps it was in the time of St Helier himself, when the marauding pirates in the 6th century came towards our seafront and saw the lonely hermit on his rock, signalling danger to the people who lived inland. And even in the period of the Victorians, the combined brains of people living in Jersey was able to create a really very attractive town and harbour and seafront. And anyone who's seen the paintings by the great landscape and seascape painters of the 18th and 19th centuries will know how attractive St Helier looked. And yet, sir, the 20th century and the 21st have really destroyed the appearance of St Helier from the sea. And the reclamation site, of course, plays its part in that. And my view is that it will probably only get worse. I'm grateful that the Minister has decided to reduce the height of the superfilling, but it is still going to be an eyesore. Perhaps it will not be as much of an eyesore as the incinerator, which members may remember I and of course the residents of St Helier campaigned vigorously against when indeed a deputy of St Helier suggested it should be taken from its planned site in Belazan Valley and placed in the most prominent position possible on the foreshore. But that is history. And what we are faced with now is a proposal to carry on placing toxic waste, asbestos, on the lowest lying part of the island at a time when we know there are rising sea levels and climate change, and nobody knows how severe that is going to be. And also, of course, inert waste on the foreshore. And I have to say, to go back to the 19th century, as we know, the town church was once on the beach, practically, just separated from the sand by a wall. And the Victorians, they were actually better at it than we are, I think. They reclaimed land from the sea in order to build quite a lot of St Helier. And then, of course, built a beautiful granite seawall all the way around St Albans Bay, around to the harbours. So I am not against reclamation. I'm not against putting the inert waste that our building industry is creating in the manner that the Minister has said. And I believe that in a small island like Jersey, where land is a precious resource, we have no option but to consider reclamation in the future. To revert to what I was saying about rising sea levels, further land reclamation on the south coast of Jersey is probably the only way we're going to stop the water coming over and flooding the people living on the south coast of Jersey, not only in St Helier, but also, of course, in St Clement and St Brelade and so on. So to make my position clear, I do believe that reclamation and the placing of inert waste, good clean rubble, in other words, can help us. It can help us by extending the island if it's managed properly and its ecological or environmental effects are understood and mitigated. But so it is the toxic waste that gives me pause. It's the toxic waste, the asbestos, that makes me reluctant to put my name to this proposition, because we don't know what the future holds, and I don't like the idea of leaving for the next generation to clear up. However well we're told these cells will be that are supposed to protect them, I don't like the idea of leaving that inert waste for future generations, and I wonder what they will think when they look back at this assembly and say, had they really exhausted all the possibilities of dealing with the toxic waste? It isn't the big volume is the inert waste, and I think to bring them together in the way the Minister has done is not helpful. I support his strategy for inert waste. I do not support the placing of toxic waste on the foreshore of St Helier. I don't believe that it would have been impossible to find somewhere else to put these cells, these holy watertight cells, rather than in the parish of St Helier. Thank you, sir.
Conotable Trinity.
Thank you, sir. I thought I should speak early in the debate, as the main reason that this is before us today has already been alluded to by the Minister, is that the Planning Committee's recent refusal of the 2016 retrospective planning application. I hope the Minister will agree with me that it was unreasonable to expect a small number of members of the Planning Committee to regularise and simply rubber stamp the unauthorised activities that have taken place on this site for several years. Had this been a commercial or private individual other than government, it would have not been allowed to continue as it has done unabated. That said, I entirely agree that today the Minister and the Department find themselves between a rock and a hard place when it comes to the safe disposal of both toxic and inert waste. There must be an immediate and positive steps to extend the life of this facility by minimising the amount of waste generally and the amount of toxic waste that the site is required to accommodate. The report highlights that the source of 92% of the hazardous waste deposited so far has been produced by government or government arm's length organisations, a proportion of which comes from the essential infrastructure work like the sewage treatment works, but a much greater proportion has been dug out of the original West of Albert reclamation site and shipped to La Collette. I'm uncomfortable that the prospect of having to continue to extract, treat and dispose of leachate from the hazardous waste pits, but I am encouraged, having met and spoken with officers and their assurances that the processes are tightly controlled and monitored and the outputs remain within tolerance. This site at La Collette is the only home for our inert and hazardous waste at the moment, and it is the base for numerous other waste management activities and recycling processes. It provides a temporary home to stockpile the vast quantities of household domestic rubbish that we collect and produce daily at times when the incinerator is out of action or shut down for maintenance.
Sorry, someone's... Oh, sorry. Do you mind turning off your phone, please?
Beg your pardon, I thought it was off. It is off now, sir.
All right.
My apologies.
Thank you very much. Yes, Conotable.
Sorry. So when the incinerator is out of action or shut down for maintenance, this vast quantity of material has to be stored somewhere temporarily. Storage and treatment and disposal or recycling of the seaweed and sand raked up and removed from our beaches. Dewatering and dealing with the unmentionable sludge that's created when the cavern is used, and many other related uses that nobody would want just over the fence or in their backyard. The quicker we fill up with solid waste, the sooner we will drive these other processes to locations that will be equally unacceptable. There has been a significant investment by the contractor who undertakes the aggregate recycling process. However, we cannot continue to produce stockpiles of materials that the construction industry seem reluctant to take. I don't understand why it is. Are they priced competitively, or is there an educational piece that needs to be done with the construction industry professionals to maximise the use of recycled material? Or is it much more convenient just to continue extracting virgin rock and sand? This heads up why we must extend the useful life of this facility for as long as possible, through much tighter control. I'm encouraged that this proposition suggests there will be an overall reduction in the height of the mounds from that originally applied for, and the commitment to providing a properly designed and landscape vision with public access restored as soon as possible. I'm further encouraged that the solid waste team will be in future a statutory consultee to the planning process when hazardous waste and non-recyclable waste volumes are proposed to be generated by planning applications. I would ask the Minister, when he sums up, just to clarify for me that there is no intention of depositing hazardous waste in cells other than in the East Headland. As I read paragraph A, numeral 2, it talks about forming the East and South Headlands by depositing hazardous waste in cells. But when I go on to read paragraph A, numeral 3, it suggests forming the South Headland and West Headland by the deposit of inert waste. For paragraph B, I would much prefer commitment that a long-term strategy will be produced no later than the end of 2025, rather than relying on whenever the next review of the island plan takes place. Whilst I don't personally like the idea of the La Collette Mountain, we have to be realistic. We are where we are today. It is an unenviable situation, results from a lack of action by several previous governments. Therefore, I hope members will support the Minister today. Otherwise, we risk bringing our construction industry to its knees, which will have a lasting and devastating impact on our island economy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Conor. Deputy Alex Curtis.
Thank you, sir. As members may know, I've taken a great interest in the development at La Collette for a number of years. For those who were preparing to speak on my amendment, I apologise, and I can confirm I've not withdrawn that lightly. Following extensive conversations, I am placing a great deal of trust in the Minister to uphold the principles that we have discussed that were in my amendment. As an islander, I watched with dismay at the formation of the Eastern La Collette Mound. Like many islanders, I failed to grasp how such a monstrous and frankly ugly creation could be thrust upon us without planning permission. You can imagine my further dismay when I learnt what was contributing to the rapid rise in height of this mound. One may have sympathy for 62,900 tonnes of incinerator waste and ash that formed this mound in the past 10 years. But why was our coastline, our views from St Clement to Noirmont, being given up for the dumping of 145,300 tonnes of contaminated soils to development by our arm's-length organisations in their activity of digging up basements out of our previously reclaimed waterfront? This absurdity felt like a government interested in short-term profit over long-term sustainability. It was one factor that made me feel, at least that previous governments of the day, were sacrificing our island for quick wins. It is fair to say that I expect most of us wish this mound, or as we creatively market it as a headland now, was never formed, and indeed that it went away. But we know that that cannot be done. Unfortunately, we must accept the mistakes that led to this. What we can do, however, is learn from these and start, for a change, making long-term sustainable decisions based on what Jersey wants to be and needs to provide. Jersey needs a solution for hazardous waste storage. Whether we like it or not, we produce hazardous waste in the form of development and in the form of incineration. The problem is we have no site on island that can store this waste without creating environmental and social risks. The only viable site we have is La Collette, and only so if we approve extra capacity on the Eastern Mound. This isn't new information. The Solid Waste Strategy of 2005 recognised this, highlighting that it was important to find a new site for hazardous and inert waste. We are now at 2023, and that site, I think, is no closer to coming online. This means that for the foreseeable future, any capacity that we approve on the Eastern Mound is all we have. This is where my amendment had come in, sir. Sir, I'm incredibly concerned that we will repeat the mistakes of our past, pursuing quick profit over long-term cost. Many of us, I'm sure, have heard motivational speeches that go along the lines of, if you had £4,212 to spend and that was all you had, how would you spend it? In this case, the analogy would be that there are 4,212 weeks in an average Jersey person's life. Once you can choose however you like to fill those, but once you've used them, they are gone. There is no chance at a do-over, at a second chance, or start from zeros. So, sir, you can guess where I'm going with this. If you had roughly 150,000 cubic metres of hazardous waste storage, how would you spend them? Would you gorge on them now? Would you enjoy a feast of them, forgetting the consequences of the long term? Would you ration them carefully, spreading the value of that capacity as far and wide as possible? Or would you be as bold, or dare I say naive, as to assume you'll get your second chance and your do-over? Me, I will play the long game. I would prioritise my cubic metres sparingly. I would think about essential services, the construction of a healthcare facility, the liquid waste network that may create waste. I would think about small development that has no impact, but I would think about the future capacity in the rainy days that will come. So what causes me concern, sir, is when I read P17, I see a table predicting the future sources of contaminated waste. We see asbestos creating 730 tonnes per annum, animal and clinical incineration producing 190 tonnes per annum, and a proposed southwest waterfront development producing 360,000 tonnes. That is 391 years of asbestos and incineration waste. And we've already heard that there will be a point where there is no asbestos left to collect and dispose of. I will cover a detail on that later, but this sounds to me the analogy of using up the life supply of weeks on an all-inclusive holiday to the Maldives. No matter how enjoyable your holiday will be, it's not worth trading the rest of your life for it. So my amendment also addressed the southern and western mounds and whether they should be temporary. And this would have bound the hands of a future assembly, and perhaps with good reason. Firstly, the land at La Collette is valuable. Whether this be for light industrial, future uses, or continued waste processing, as we've heard from the Conotab of Trinity, a flat level site is more valuable than a mound. And indeed, the solid waste strategy recognised this. Secondly, I believe, as many others do, that the proposed southern and western mounds will be an eyesore. Disconnected from each other, the three mounds will appear as artificial islands above the rock armour. The Minister has committed to a range of things, and has highlighted that at all available costs, we will see those mounds go down. It is in all of our interests, given those two reasons. So I am reassured that there is a great reason that will be coming up for those mounds to go down. We have a shoreline management plan, and that will require reclamation. And the Minister's engineers have told me that the most advantageous thing to do is have a readily supply of inert material to make sure construction is as short and minimises disruption to residents around reclamation areas as possible. So I look to the Minister and tell him we have a solution for how to remove those mounds. It will be when we reclaim for the shoreline management plan. So I see us agreeing, sir, in P17 to a few principles. One, that we need to create capacity for hazardous waste. I think that's fair. We need to create some capacity in the short term for inert waste, and we've recognised that inert waste can be reused and moved. And finally, we need to better manage and minimise the sources of this waste in a joined-up manner to extend the life of this facility as long as possible. So, sir, it is fair to say, if we mean what we say in this Assembly, the task really is to accept waste minimisation at the heart of all decisions. Things on this island will have to change. If we are to spend our 150,000 cubic metres wisely, that will require buy-in from the planning authority. And it will require teeth in the solid waste department to act as a statutory consultee in objecting to applications that spend our capacity poorly. And should both parties play their part and they take the severity, real severity of this situation seriously, then that is why I feel I could remove my amendment. I was reassured in some of my readings on the topic when I read the Solid Waste Department's proof of evidence submitted to the as yet undetermined Southwest Waterfront development. I say this not taking aim at a single application, but highlighting the absolute critical risk to the island's hazardous waste supply and storage if this or similar applications involving largely contaminated land are developed without bona fide waste minimisation at their heart. In it, the government engineer recognises that the application fails to minimise waste, crucially hazardous waste. And a couple of quotes from his assessment may aid the Assembly. The application for the Southwest St Helier development has stated the generation of a very large volume of waste in each stage of the construction phase plan, of which a large proportion during excavation works is considered to be contaminated by varying degrees. He goes on to say, although remediation and stabilisation of waste has been identified, the applicant and its specialists have not yet provided detail of techniques and their effectiveness on the contaminants identified in other sites, such as Horizon IFC in Castle Key. This is saying we've never seen the applicant minimise waste before, why should we believe it now? And finally, the development of single and double basements within an area of known contamination where it has been identified that the highest likelihood is that that waste is contaminated and will need to be disposed of at La Collette, has been identified as a major and permanent effect on the expected long-term finite island resource for the controlled containment of contaminated wastes. If that doesn't sound like a department standing up for an absolute critical future, I don't know what is. On the topic of waste minimisation, the engineer went on to say, it is felt that no consideration was given to reducing the impact of design of basement parking by further ideas, and provides recommendations including the applicant is requested to evaluate the option of alternative designs to further reduce or eliminate basements to greatly reduce the arising of contaminated wastes. So you can imagine my relief in reading that the engineers are speaking up. They are saying that we have this resource. It will only work if the planning authority and infrastructure speak and make sure that waste minimisation is not a tick box exercise, but one that informs the onward design and use of any site in particular. The argument of financial viability cannot supersede our 150,000 cubic metres. The cost of failing to live within our means will exceed any short-term win. Any site, after all, is worth developing based on the value given its constraints it inherently has. In essence, when developing, live within your means, live within your policy, and don't overvalue your site and its potential yield based on something that it cannot provide. It is worth noting, if members could think this is one-sided, if I quote from the SOJDC's Waste Advisor Waterman in their response. They say, it is not clear to me how new capacity for contaminated soils and similar will be found on Jersey should Le Collet remain unavailable. Let's be honest, sir, we need to be assuming that any approved capacity today for Le Collet for hazardous waste is not a short-term plan, it's not a medium-term plan, it is and has to be a long-term plan. As members who will have seen my email last night will recall, I am committed to securing the long-term function of hazardous waste storage. In discussions with the Minister yesterday, he suggested that should something go awry and these principles aren't followed, the states can always rule with a further proposition. And indeed, he said he would support that position. So to the ministers with control of this, that of infrastructure and environment, I urge them to recognise these principles and to not underestimate the as yet intangible cost of living beyond our means, running out of hazardous waste storage, and the onward impact that will have to the island and its economy. And members, I ask you to think that if you have 150,000 cubic metres of hazardous waste storage to last our lifetimes, how will you be using them?
Thank you, Deputy.
Sir,
Yes, Conor.
can you just clarify, please? 2 members of the Planning Committee have spoken already. Can you confirm that those members of the committee are able to vote on this, please, sir, without being conflicted?
Thank you for raising that, Conor Tarb. It's really a matter for the members concerned, whether they decide to vote. Obviously, they don't want to be seen to tie their hands in relation to any future applications. I don't know what future applications there might be in relation to this site, so it's a matter for them. Yes, Deputy Luce.
Thank you, sir. And another member of the Planning Committee stands to address the Assembly. In my case, the Vice Chairman, so I'm quite a bit to do with the reason that the debate is in front of us here today. But many of us are equally responsible. I look around the chamber at people who've been here 3, 6, 10 years, like myself, and we're all equally responsible for this happening. We've all allowed the mound at Le Collet to continue to grow, and we've all been too happy to turn a blind eye because it was convenient to do so. So, as it is quite often said, sir, and we are where we are, and what's to be done. So we can't go back, certainly not when it comes to contaminated waste. The Basel Convention is very unlikely to allow us to export things. In any case, the engineered cells are safe, and we do know where they are, which is greatly different from what we've done and the previous disasters that we're now seeing west of Albert. The Minister's been quite right in everything he said pretty much, and I just take a small exception to two things that I think we could do better. And the first one is design. Those of us who sit on the planning committee and those who put forward applications know that drawings come in front of the committee drawn by architects, and they're designed by architects. But when I look at the drawings submitted with this application, it's quite clear that designed by engineers. And I urge the Minister to maybe do a slightly more imaginative and artistic attempt at trying to make these mounds look like parts of Jersey and not look like something that's come straight out of an engineering workshop. The other issue I take is with inert waste, and I know other members have already spoken about inert waste, but I take a slightly different view, because to say there's no other option than to take inert waste to La Collette is not where I'm coming from. And I know Le Gigolin Quarry Granite Products has been passed to put inert waste in. And we do also have a large sand pit at St. Ones, which is now empty, which is a void area crying out for some inert waste that can't contaminate water or land. And I'm very disappointed that the size very quickly achieved of this inert waste heap on the south and west of La Collette is coming out of the ground so quickly. Anybody who's had the ability to arrive by sea on a ferry or in a boat recently will be amazed how fast that is happening. The Minister's quite right. We do need to carry on using the site in the short and medium term. But for myself, sir, I'm hugely disappointed that we've ended up with La Collette, using La Collette in this way. We've had some comparisons with the west of Albert, and the two reclamation sites could not, in my view, be more different. West of Albert, every square foot is hugely valuable and defended by developers. La Collette is literally a waste ground, and it's a huge waste that we've spent these vast amount of money allowing this reclamation land to be used in the way it has. Where is light industry? Where are the other bad neighbours that desperately need sites to run their businesses from? There are vast areas at La Collette which we could use so much better, and that to me has been a mistake of the past. I'm also disappointed but encouraged by this proposition in regard to public access, and members may remember for some time, especially when I was Minister back in 2014, I fought hard to open up that public access so that at least there is some return on investment from the people who live on this island, and that's got to happen. And I thank the Constable of St Helier for bringing this forward and the Minister for accepting the suggestions. And the other things I would say, that landscaping could be so much more imaginative. There's a lot of space down there. It's not impossible to find large areas with very deep topsoil to be placed and semi-mature trees to be brought in and bushes to be placed so that it actually looks so much better. But it's been mentioned, as Deputy Curtis most recently, developing policy to minimise all waste. We've got to force engineers to specify recycled aggregates. Currently, sir, we're digging out Jersey at Granite Products and at Rhone. We're turning it into concrete while we take other concrete and take it down to La Collette for recycling. It's absolutely wrong in my mind that recycled aggregates can't be used more widespread, in a more widespread manner by engineers when they specify foundations and other parts of buildings. Members need to be under no illusion, sir, that these proposals which are in front of us today are not small items. They're only going to get bigger, and I know the Minister is making great play of the fact that he's reduced the proposed increase in height from 10 down to 4.5 metres, but members need to be under no illusion. That additional 4.5 metres height on what is currently there is still a substantial increase in what we're going to see. I've said I'm not happy about the inert waste superfill, and the south and west headlands in particularly were not separated in this proposition, and that's very cleverly done, but we don't get the option to choose one or the other. In my view, this material, this inert material, could and should be going somewhere else on the island. But we can go on and on about this. We need to use this area to best effect. There's no more excuses. We've got to get on with the access, the public access. We've got to try and address the poor design, because there's no design gone into these mounds at all. But the other thing we must stop doing is we must just stop carrying on as we are and closing our eyes. We have to support this proposition because despite what we're told from others, there really is no common sense alternative. There's no realistic option for doing something differently. We do have to, and I finish with this, and I just follow up on what Deputy Curtis have said, that is this proposal at La Collette is not sustainable. In fact, it has a finite life. It cannot go on forever, and we've got to use a common sense and very realistic approach to come up with a policy to decide what we're going to do in the future. But for here, today, sir, we must say yes to this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Rob Ward.
Thank you, sir. It's very good to follow those people involved in the planning committee, because we get a bit of insight into some of the issues that arose from the previous planning application. The Constable of Trinity raised a very good point regards paragraphs 2 and 3, and I think a slight inconsistency in the proposition. I would like the Minister to address that, because that's a very important point. Where will this hazardous waste actually end up? I would also say, sir, and perhaps it's just my approach to these things, but whenever we say it is entirely safe, I don't think there is a single scientist, engineer anywhere that would say that anything is entirely safe. We had this when we dumped nuclear waste in the North Sea in containers, and we aren't entirely sure what's going to happen to it over the long term. So we have to be very, very aware of that, sir, and that is something in the back of my mind that concerns me enormously. So in terms of a coastal walk, that's a good idea, as long as the area is safe. So there are a few things I will mention. To take Deputy Curtis's analogy of the amount of time and how long we live, it does seem to me that perhaps this proposition is a little, what we're getting to is a little bit of dying young as late as we possibly can with this this proposition, to have everything happening at once in a finite resource. And I think that notion of finite is something we don't do well in this assembly. Obviously, I would say that is because we never have a consistency in the rule accountability in this assembly, because too many it's individuals that come forward, and we never have that ongoing accountability for groups who make the choices. But that's another issue, I suppose. In terms of a long-term strategy, what I would like to hear, sir, it does say in the proposition that the Environment Minister and the Infrastructure Minister will develop a long-term strategy, and that's me paraphrasing because I can't see my own screen. But I think that is the content of it. And I would like to hear from the ministers, plural, as to how this would happen, because that is a very important point. A long-term strategy in terms of what we're going to do both with inert waste and toxic waste on a finite island where we seem to be building, particularly in St Helier, sir, I've got to say, who is taking the brunt of the building again and again and again and again, without the overall plans to actually deal with green space and travel and schools and facilities and youth facilities, regardless of the hard work that some of us as deputies have done over the last 5 years in trying to get those brought forward. But again, I digress a little. And it is prior to the next island plan. I think this was alluded to before, sir. How much will happen before that plan in in inverted commas, uncontrolled way without a plan to actually do it? And this is time dependent. And we were told yesterday that the reason we can't bring forward the additional policy, it's not called that, but I can't remember what it's called, for planning, regards the number of homes that are affordable, is because there isn't officer time to do it. But we've just been told today that there will be officer time. Well, there were needs to bring forward a strategy before the next island plan review. And indeed, sir, this is an extremely urgent plan that needs to come forward because we have this finite resource that we've been talking about. there is, and I would like to see, for example, there are some opportunities in that strategy. There is no doubt that we are going to have to reclaim land in the bay to stop flooding due to sea rise and climate change. That's a reality. Look at the world around us at the moment, look in the news. And there is I don't think it's an irony, so I don't know what the word is, a concern that one of the flood areas is where we're about to build the ambulatory part of the new hospital. And so if we don't do something about protecting that from flood risk, we could be heading down a pathway that is really risky for this island in terms of one of its major resources. And that is why this plan is so urgent at the moment. We have to think long term, sir, and we have to think what we're going to do with all of these things. And so there is a contradiction as well. In part B2, identify more sites for the processing. And then there was a contradiction, I've got to say, sir, in the Minister's opening speech, where he said the only parish that can do this is St Helier. So we seem to have already identified our own sites, which is St Helier. Now that concerns me, because we cannot have two contradictory points within a proposition and then presentation of that proposition, so that does need to be addressed. And we are in a difficult position. We are in a difficult position because we've got here with uncontrolled development. And well, I don't know if the word's pleased or relieved or interested to hear the Minister talk about how in the past we have had scant regard for our environment. And indeed this proposition does not deal with the pollution of the past. There were some serious pollution incidents that were talked about by States members previously who were utterly ignored and vilified for talking about such things. And we're only now standing in this assembly and saying, well, something should have been done about those. We'll try and do something now as a last resource, and into the future we'll come up with a plan. Now, that concerns me a little. And so I want to just sort of finish in a way by saying that whenever we talk about planning application rules and how we're going to apply them, when there are difficult choices to be made, such as you cannot produce certain, excess waste, you have to look very carefully at the materials you're using, you have to deal with the asbestos appropriately. We repeatedly get these arguments that developers need to have the opportunity to build effectively and in a cost-effective way. And you cannot have your cake and eat it when it comes to these things. We are a small island trying to build so many things, and unless we have regulation that is adhered to and applied by ministers, by government, then we will have this situation getting worse and worse and worse, and this finite resource will be used very, very rapidly. So there are parts of this proposition that I'm very pleased to see, to talk about strategies, to talk about the planning applications, and the words are very good that are being spoken by the Minister. The intention is great. And I think I've said before, so intentions are one thing. The reality sometimes are very different. And that's what we need to be very careful about. And yes, we are having a threat held against us again, that the construction industry will collapse if we don't pass this. So it's a very difficult situation to be in. I personally don't like those types of propositions. And we're seeing it all over. Certain markets will collapse if we introduce a simple regulation. We're going to probably hear that again at some time during this sitting. And we will hear it over this one. And we have to be extremely careful as to what we accept with those arguments. However, we're in a difficult position. And it is difficult to walk away today without an alternative plan, because the reality is we have to do something about this waste. It's interesting, sir, that it was mentioned that the headland was sort of redefined as a headland and not a waste dump. Similar, sir, to the incinerator, as was called by the previous minister repeatedly as an energy to waste plant. So it's an incinerator that makes a bit of energy, inefficiently actually. But that's one of the things we have to be careful of. And I think this is where the concern is of this assembly. That we've heard so many things before, and we've got ourselves into a really difficult position here. And we seem to have no alternative, but we'll have some plans in the future. So I really hope that we are not making the wrong decision today, But what we have to do is to look at those plans carefully, and we have to prioritise some time to come up with those plans urgently. And if that means extra money to have extra officers and extra work being done on that, then that needs to be done, because this is an urgent thing for us to do in order to deal with this waste. So I worked in an old building. When they demolished the older Rocky School and I was working there, I can remember the asbestos being removed and me thinking, I worked in there for years. Hopefully it wasn't dislodged. It's not a nice material. It's something that needs to be dealt with very, very carefully. And so we have to look extremely carefully at how we're going to dispose of this and make sure it's safe for Islanders well into the future. So there's an awful lot to think about in this, and I'm currently, sir, I would say I'm 60-40 on this one, but with the reassurances from the ministers about future plans and just address those contradictions, we may be able to get somewhere. Thank you, sir.
Deputy Sadia.
Thank you, sir. I think it was 15 years ago that there was a new intake at the elections in 2008, one of whom was Deputy Wimberley of St Mary, one of St Mary's finest deputies I think that it's ever had. It's a subjective opinion, of course, but I got on well with the deputy. He made it one of his first propositions to try to rescind the energy from waste plant, which Deputy Ward has quite rightly said is just a euphemistic way of saying an incinerator. What do we do in Jersey in 2008 when the rest of Europe for decades has been moving to a reduce, reuse, recycle model? In practice, not just as a mantra, that we go and build a big box down to La Colette to burn our rubbish so that we can bury the residue in the ground. And that's seen as a 21st century solution to that. So that wasn't done in my name because I voted for the rescindment. And I was perhaps just one of a couple of members of this current Assembly, Deputy Southern also was there at the time. So this is not my project. This is not a project that I have any truck with or that I support in any way. It's not the way that we should be doing business. So the members who stand up one after the other and say, well, it's not an ideal situation, but you know, this is the situation we find ourselves in. That's your problem and that's your decision, but you don't have to automatically follow the line that is being set by the Minister. And I look forward to hearing maybe some input from the Environment Minister on this, because we've heard the DFI solution here. We haven't heard what the environmental vision is for now and for the future, which I would like to hear. I want to talk about three words initially: legacy, progress, and civilization. And let's think about what these mean both now and for the future. We often talk about the future generation. We talk about the future generation often in context of economics and debt, like we don't want to be saddling the future generation with debt. But do we often talk about environmental legacy that we're leaving for future generations? If I think back to my own constituency, 250,000 years ago, there was a legacy that I wasn't there at the time. And I think the constituencies might have been slightly different back then. We all know about La Cotte and the Neanderthals who were hunting, the cavemen literally hunting, living in the caves and hunting on the plain that was there, men and women, hunter-gatherers. They left us a legacy and evidence of woolly mammoths. We can see their tooths in the Jersey Museum, and of woolly rhinos and the flint tools that they created. There was probably a Breton chieftain who left us a gold torque here, which was found by workmen who were digging the foundations of a house in St Helier in 1889, exactly 100 years after the French Revolution. We know about Le Catillon hoard 50 years ago and Le Catillon II, which are Iron Age coins which were left here in the island. And of course, perhaps the most salient one of all is Le Hugby, which is one of the finest passage graves that we have from the Neolithic period at Le Hugby from about 4,000 or 3,500 years ago, or even BC, I think. But certainly it's that ballpark, and it's older than Stonehenge, if I recall rightly. and it's covered with a mound, isn't it? It's called La Hougue because La Hougue is a mound, and Le B is probably related to the legend of Homby, but we're not entirely sure about that. And these are all legacies which are left by people coming to Jersey and leaving us nice presents to find in the future, so that when somebody's digging a foundation, they say, oh, I didn't expect to find this nice gold talk there, let's send that to a museum. What have current governments been leaving as the legacy? A kind of time capsule, if you like, for future generations to find. It's both toxic and inert waste. So when you get the archaeologists digging around at the Colette, they'll be like, oh, what have we found here? It's a whole load of inert waste that's still there. It's called the mound, isn't it? The mound sounds very nice. We should maybe rename it La Hougue. Either La Hougue Toxique, it sounds very exotic, doesn't it? Although it's probably not toxic waste. I don't want to be pulled up for misleading anyone. It's inert waste. And let's look at what inert waste is, because inert sounds really good, doesn't it? If it's an inert chemical, it means it doesn't react, so it's not going to harm you. So if we've all sat through the science lessons, we probably like inert elements because they're not going to react. They don't cause an explosion. Not like, I think, is it manganese or magnesium? I remember having some fun with some magnesium ribbon in a chemistry class when you set fire to it. And you wouldn't want to do that too often. Or with the hydrogen when you light that and put the glowing splint into it. But what is inert waste? Inert waste is basically they're materials that are unreactive biologically and chemically, and this means that they're inert. And so when we dispose of them, they take an extremely long time to decompose, or they don't decompose at all. So this is what we're burying into the ground. How does that fit with the mantra of reduce, reuse, and recycle? Because in fact, we're not even recycling properly in Jersey, and recycling is the very last of those three in the order of what you should be doing. The first thing is to reduce. Are we reducing our consumption and our output of waste materials? Because waste is, of course, it doesn't have to be waste. These are actual valuable products which, for many decades, countries have been recognizing. That's why you have reverse exchange machines all over Europe where you can, and we used to do it in Jersey, you used to be able to send your bottle back, and you get your 5 or 10 pence if you took it to the bottom of Larisha's, Le Canavay, or wherever it was that you used to live. So in terms of progress, what kind of civilization are we? Both maybe modern civilization, but in Jersey, we like to think we're a modern island when it comes to finance, but when it comes to the basics, where are we? And the reason I raise this, sir, is because I'm really struggling here whether or not we're being taken down an avenue where I'm always skeptical when you're told you don't have a choice. You have to vote for this, and because we are elected members and we've got 3 buttons in front of us in French, but effectively we've got 2 buttons, haven't we? Because, you know, if we were all elected to abstain on a regular basis, there's no point in having us in here. Every time you abstain, you might as well not be here. If you're sick or you're on a women's conference somewhere around the world, that's just the same as abstaining, right? So I suggest you don't abstain on this one. Members, don't abstain. So we've effectively got a binary choice. And I think we have to use both our values and our logic to come to a conclusion on that. So I am skeptical about being led down this avenue where I'm forced into a decision because we don't have any other options. I've got a lot of some colleagues and associates outside the Assembly who are in tourism. And one thing they've told me, I don't know if it's still true today, is they like to typecast the type of visitors they get. So not because they like to stereotype, but because they know over a period of time the kind of thing that different visitors are interested in. And they say often on the coach tours, the British visitors want to know about the rich and famous people who live in the island. But when the Germans come over, for example, one of the questions that they ask time and time again is, what do you do with your recycling over here? Because it's inbuilt into them as social democrats in Europe, and they're interested in those kind of things. Maybe in the same way as when we go to France, the first thing we do is rather than go to a museum or an aquarium, we go to the supermarkets to see what they've got. So each nationality perhaps has its idiosyncrasies. And I think that goes back to the fact that Europeans, for a long time, have got to grips with the fact. I'd say even in France, as somebody who's French, I found it remarkable just how switched on the French are now with all their environmental practices, which they maybe weren't even 5 or 10 years ago. And the problem is, if you go back about 30 years ago, these issues were still being raised. I remember former Senator Stuart Sivray constantly talking about the fact that we were burying our rubbish, we were burying these waste products, whether it was here, and I remember him talking about the waste under Millennium Park, the Gas Place site. And the problem is, and this was being talked about in the 90s, there was a whole swathe of environmentalists who came into Jersey politics during the mid and early 90s, and unfortunately they were often labelled as cranks and nobody listened to them. And yet here we are maybe 20 years later, and we've got the minister actually effectively telling us what they said and saying, but we're in a difficult position here, so we just have to keep doing what we're doing already because it's too difficult to do anything different. So my challenge here is that actually, is it too difficult to fundamentally change, first of all, the basis that creates all of this waste, which I don't think needs to be created in the first place? And secondly, is there another option for how we treat this? It may be difficult, it might be costly, it might need thinking out of the box, but there will be people all around the world who are dealing with these exact same issues and who have got specialisms in these areas, which we simply don't have at the moment. And I'd like to know more about that before simply rubber stamping a permission, if you like, for business as usual. I see this proposition as very much business as usual. And the last point I would make is, again, to reiterate my invitation to hear from the Environment Minister. I noticed that in his election manifesto, the Environment Minister said that if elected, he is elected, he would support, but I will support the creation of a separate Minister for Environment, whose role will be to protect and enhance the environment, championing its importance in government and to the public. And I do raise this issue because we don't have a separate Environment Minister. We've got a Planning and Environment Minister, and the Planning Minister, or whoever that is now or in the future, is going to have an uncomfortable time, especially when the Environment Minister should be holding the DFI Minister, whoever that is, at any one point in check, and they should be both doing that. And it should be up to the Environment Minister to say, actually, I don't think this is the right way forward, or if it is the right way forward, we can tolerate it for the moment because there's a greater vision which we're going to be implementing in the future. So those are my thoughts, sir. And at the moment, this proposition is unlikely to get my support.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Scott.
Thank you, sir. It's always a pleasure to follow Deputy Tadier, because he always gives me so much food for thought. I've thought long and hard about this proposition, and one thing that Deputy Tadier mentions is that it's very much being presented there's no plan B. But first of all, I actually want to congratulate the Minister for very much suggesting he's not just thinking of the short term and the medium term, but the long term as well. And I just wanted to point out to Deputy Rob Ward, who isn't in the chamber at the moment, when he was expressing the concern that the proposition only talks about St Helier, that the amendment that's been put forward by the Minister and has been accepted by him, or is his amendment, what do you expect, that it does suggest that there'll be a longer term plan which will look at site requirements across the parishes, and I hope that will provide Deputy Luce with some comfort there, because that was something I was mindful of. What do you do with this waste? It's there, you can't ignore it, or you shouldn't continue ignoring it anyway. And something has to be done in the short term. We can't ignore that either. And none of us, in terms of the short term, have proposed a plan B. None of us have put forward those amendments. Maybe none of us have the technical ability to do so. And I thought that Deputy Tadio's kind of discussion about I can't even say the word Neanderthal rubbish was quite interesting too, because I'll point out that, in fact, over the years there has been some element of just dealing with toxic issues just by burying underground. I lived in a place in London called Blackheath, which was there apparently because of the plague and the concern that there was anthrax at some point. They basically buried it, which was great because it meant that you had this great big heath. It never got developed. And even more recently, during this Second World War, having mentioned this already, the British actually experimented with anthrax and made a whole island in Scotland uninhabitable for a few years, although it did get declared anthrax-free in 1990, so in theory it can be inhabited again. And unfortunately, this seems to be the way that we have to go before we actually come up with solutions. Sometimes at this point in history, we just haven't come up with those solutions. We haven't come up with those solutions in terms of nuclear waste. We find that that's been promoted as nice and clean, but at the end of the day, we still have got that problem with toxic waste, and we haven't come up with solutions. With respect to Deputy Alex Curtis, I point out that one of his roles as Assistant Minister for Economic Development is involved in the Technology Accelerator Fund, and I was thinking, well, that would be one of those interesting problems that maybe one should promote that to solve, because that is a real problem for the island, and I do hope there's a decent crafted problem statement in that respect as well. But coming, and I think the Constable Trinity's made a really good point in terms of the reference to the island plan in this proposition, that there will be long-term planning followed by the next island plan to 2025 beyond. I think I've mentioned the States Assembly before. It gave me great discomfort when the Minister for Environment suggested that the Bridging Island Plan could potentially be a permanent island plan, notwithstanding the intention that it would be temporary. And I really will urge that that Bridging Island Plan is treated as a Bridging Island Plan so that issues like this can be addressed before the expiry of 10 years of the adoption of the Bridging Island Plan. And the enforcement of the sustainability provisions, because, as also has been mentioned, much of the toxic waste, much of that's actually been created, has been the result of building and construction and the methods used there. But are we going to stop housing? Are we going to stop the development of it? This is a natural problem in the island too. So what we can say is that we do need that housing, we do need that construction, and it needs to be managed carefully. So at the end of the day, when it comes to these housing issues, we do need to think these things through. So I will be supporting the proposition. I commend the Minister for thinking long-term as well as short-term. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Howell.
Thank you, sir. Today we are facing a legacy issue. 92% of the waste, especially hazardous waste, are being produced by government. I'm not against inert waste, although I do understand that the Constable of St Helier may like to have it not all at the Colette. But I do have reservations about hazardous waste. I'm very concerned of the prospect that we may think of digging up the waterfront to trundle the very toxic and hazardous waste from that area round to La Colette, and then have all those. So we're creating a problem. We've got a problem. We're going to make a worse problem by putting it there, sir. And I think there may be other means of construction. Perhaps we don't need to dig this toxic waste out. I think if any of us had been in this assembly we would not have allowed that dumping of refrigerators and batteries and asbestos and all sorts of things not in a proper bund at that time. So I think we are hit where we are now, sir, but we shouldn't be carrying on doing what we've always done, because I think there is a problem. And I would really like to ask the Minister for the Environment if we could all really get together and come up with a solution for our waste. And if, as Deputy Curtis has said, I really don't think we should be using up all our capacity. We have to be very, very mindful that we do need a new hospital, and we have to think how we're going to produce housing that doesn't build 2 basements. And I'd also just like to ask the Attorney General one question. If anybody gets cancer in the future from our hazardous waste, who will be responsible? Is it all of us? Is it the Environment Minister? You know, I just worry, because it's for our future, it's the generations that are to come. La Colette, la Hugbeil is great. And all the La Cotte, we've got some really great things here. But we do have to be mindful of our environment. And I don't think we have a proper waste strategy at the moment. And I think we should be trying to produce as least amount of waste as we can. And we should be thinking of what we're doing, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Attorney General.
Yes, the Deputy asked me whether there is any legal liability, I think on the part of the States Assembly, in relation to persons who may contract cancer in the future, I assume as a result of hazardous waste. So in terms of legal rights of action in those circumstances, it's always best to advise if there is something concrete, a specific claim that is concrete and that is actual. But advising in a vacuum in terms of general rights of action, the right of action is primarily a tortious one. It's a private law claim in the law of tort, and it requires the establishment of a duty of care between the person who is suffering from the cancer and the proposed defendant. And also it's the second and third requirements are causation of the harm and loss resulting. So in those sorts of cases, the duty of care as regards the first element, that's perhaps more easy to establish, but even so there may be difficulties in establishing a direct duty of care on the part of the States Assembly, because the States Assembly as a legal person would be unlikely to be the target of a claim. It's more likely to be brought against a minister. In terms of causation, that would be the principal difficulty here, because causation of cancer can result from all sorts of causative factors. So it might be extremely difficult to establish that causation of a particular disease was a result of a waste strategy. So I think if I were to generalize, I think it would be extremely difficult to establish a private law of action in these sorts of circumstances.
Thank you. Deputy Coles.
Thank you, sir. I know in some of these circumstances it's not best to start your speech with a joke. However, I should point out to Deputy Tadier that the 90s were actually 30 years ago, not 20 years ago. Sorry to break that here. The good thing about debates is sometimes it raises questions that you hadn't really thought about asking yourself previously. And actually, the question came up about chemical reactivity. And I just had a quick Google, so I just wondered, because asbestos was a wonderful material when it was starting being used, because it didn't react with anything, didn't catch fire, didn't break down. So a quick Google search, actually, asbestos is considered chemically inert. It's a chemically inert substance. So when you actually look at the proposition in P17, and as somebody who got pulled up for his use of language in his First Amendment in this Assembly, I thought it was important to look at this. And the proposition recommends that the West Mound is going to be for inert waste. Asbestos is inert, so is this actually a loophole that is being left? Is this intentional language that has been left? That actually this mound could potentially become another dumping ground for asbestos and other chemically inactive substances. So I believe that is something that the Minister really has to pick up on, because actually use of language and making sure that we get the wording right for this is going to be for recycled building waste that is not deemed hazardous waste should actually be clear and obvious within this proposition. And I'm sure that is what is meant, but unfortunately it is the word that has been used. And so we talk about this, the issue of contaminant waste, and the Minister did make in his speech that he would be speaking to the Environment Minister, that they would be coming forward with a long-term solution. Because what I'm seeing here in front of us is another incident of kicking the can down the road. It's like, here's our short to medium-term plan, but don't worry, we will have a long-term plan come at the end. And if that is true, then we do need to... there's a lot of work that needs to be done, because as a member of the planning committee that has been mentioned, as we tour around on the bus, we hear the anecdotal stories of previous dumping grounds used within parishes. Each parish, as far as I'm led to believe, used to have its own dumping site. So are these sites known? Is there a list of known buried contaminated soil around the island? And if not, why not? Is this not something that we should be investigating? Should we be coming up with red zones of contaminated contaminated grounds on this island that the Minister for the Environment should be designated as should not be touched? We should not be disturbing this waste that is already buried and creating future problems. As Deputy Curtis has pointed out, there is only a finite amount of space that we actually have to move this materials in. And then we need to look at, as I'm sure the Minister is meaning for that west mound of inert waste of recycled building rubble, should we not be delegating projects for this? As Deputy Curtis, I feel like I'm repeating a lot what Deputy Curtis said, because he made some very, very good and very, very valid points, that we should be being prepared for our sea defences for environmental impact reasons, that, you know, should we earmark the tonnage that may be required for these backfill sites to actually have produced a product that, you know, this is how much waste we are going to estimate to use, the offset, so it's not a fixed figure of waste site that we have, but actually, you know, we forecast a use of X amount of cubic metres of waste to these sea defences. Should these projects be planned and be coming close to shovel ready before the 2040 tranche start date of these? Let's have a plan, let's have a solution, rather than just a short term, well, we're going to hold this here until we find a better solution for it. Shouldn't we be working on the better solution? We also hear that some of this recycled rubble from these buildings are not satisfactory for engineering purposes, I think is the best way to describe it. Should we not be looking at why these aren't good enough for engineering purposes, and what can we be doing to make them good enough for engineering purposes? I mean, that's something that is not within my knowledge base, and I would like a solution for that, because that is stuff we should be considering. So it is a difficult one, because we have tied our hands previously by the use of these fantastic chemicals and materials that came out in the 60s and 70s, or earlier than the 60s and 70s, and we are dealing with the consequences of that. And I believe that the cells are being engineered to be as safe as possible, because again, as with so many things in life, we're never given a guarantee of 100% safe, because we don't know. There can be something minute that has been overlooked that becomes exacerbated in time. This is why your bleach companies say they kill 99.9% of bacteria, not all bacteria, which you know, most tests would show they actually did, but there is always the chance that one microbe gets pi. So I would like clarity from the Environment Minister about what this strategy is going to look like with the Minister for Infrastructure. And there's also, I mean, there are comments that are being made by the public about the regulation of the contaminated waste sites that I think is very poignant in this, in the fact that this Environment Minister and the Infrastructure Minister do sit under with the same chief officer. So regulation sits under the same chief officer that's in charge of infrastructure. There is, I know they were saying that they put a partition, but how independent can it be if the chief officer manages both departments? It is things that we need to keep on track of. So I won't go on too much further, but I just wanted to highlight these important points for this, that we need to stop kicking the can down the road. We need to come with a long-term strategy. We also need to stop destroying buildings which are only 20 years old because they fit a market then and not a market for the future. I mean, I look at the Horizon development that we've just built, where every single one-bedroom flat in there is only suitable for a single occupant. Not a single property in that development has been built to house 2 people. So at some point, someone's going to look at this building and think, actually, it wasn't built properly, it wasn't developed properly, and might become another building that gets torn down and redeveloped to make more suitable, more adequate accommodation. So we do need proper strategies, and these strategies come from planning. So I'm glad to hear that planning are going to become, infrastructure is going to be becoming a statutory consultee to actually provide the waste management solution and not just give a cursory glance to. And that actually maybe with proper plans, proper development, we could actually prevent more waste coming forward and actually manage this properly. So this could be a solution. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Deputy Brenneth.
Thank you, sir. I'm going to start by perhaps disappointing Deputy Tadyer, because I'm going to abstain in this debate, perhaps out of an excessive caution that I may prejudice my position should I be called upon to determine an appeal. But I note that the proposition includes quite a lot of detail around what might become a future planning application, and I think it's important that there should be one person within the planning system who is not conflicted. So that's, I hope, an explanation for Ministers Wast why I will abstain. But I think I can make some comments that will hopefully assist members, maybe. And the first point I want to make is about regulation and the separation of regulation and the ability of regulation within government to regulate other parts of government. And I would say I'm exceptionally committed to that principle and to the independence of that regulatory function. And I'm also exceptionally committed to the idea that government activities should be regulated in the same way as private sector activities are regulated. And I do not believe it is good enough to say that, for example, because we can't see any other solution, we'll just allow unregulated activity to carry on. I know what goes on. I mean, at the BBC, I was very familiar with the position sometimes taken that good people felt that good things were being done, and okay, it might not have been quite, ideal in terms of principles and rules and whatever, but nevertheless, good people were doing good things. Good people doing good things is not a sufficient justification to avoid regulatory intervention. And so I welcome the fact that we have an infrastructure minister who has grabbed this problem by the horns and is attempting to tackle it. That regulatory function, however, does remain separate and it remains important, and I want to reassure members that I am absolutely committed to that principle of independent regulation sitting, which will regulate activities by government in the same way as it will the private sector. I do want to make a few other points that just have arisen from debates, from debate points made in the debate. It's worth pointing out, one person was talking about the fly ash being a waste product. Fly ash, in my understanding, the infrastructure minister may be able to confirm this, but the fly ash is recycled, actually. It's sent to to Britain, where it is turned into a product. And so I think, yes, incineration is not an ideal solution, but it is not the case that the fly ash is simply added to the dump, as it was in the past. And interesting in that sense that the points that Deputy Tadyer made about Neanderthals and the material that we now dig up as treasure, if you like, and from the Neolithic and so on. It's interesting that what was waste to Neanderthals is of value to us, and there is also truth in the fact that what has been waste in the past should now be seen in many cases as a resource. And I think that's one of the things that is most important about the work that will go on when we talk about the strategies and policies going forward. So when it comes to recycling and the policy intent and the policy framework and the policy ambition going forward, I would just make a point first about the environment in general and attitudes to the environment. Because it is true, as speakers have said, that in the past there were warnings about the cost of using the environment as a free dump. There were warnings about using the reclamation site to dump fly ash, which is now contaminated waste. And we are now in the absurd situation of having to consider digging up and dumping material that was dumped already and moving it half a mile or so to another dumping site. People often talk about environmentalism as, in the past, as some kind of wacky fringe thing, something that we can't afford. The problem, if you take that attitude, is we end up where we are now, having to pay twice to do something that, had we acted intelligently at the time, we would only have had to do once. So I would say to members, bear that in mind when environmental measures come before this Assembly. Bear that in mind when we're asked to consider short-term cost and long-term costs that will go forward for future generations. Because those costs, that environmental cost, is not a cost in the long term. And we need to think much more like that. So I would say that when we look at where we go forward from here, we should see the opportunity. We should see an opportunity to reset the way we treat our waste materials. And we should see the circular economy and our ambitions to reuse materials and keep reusing them as an opportunity for us. They're an opportunity for us to reduce long-term liabilities, to make the most of what we have on a small island. It's an opportunity for us to do something that works not just for us, but for our children and grandchildren. That is what I will be carrying into discussions about future policy in this area. And yes, as another speaker said, we should be thinking about how we reuse buildings rather than instinctively thinking that the best way to deal with this issue is to have a clear site that will be a blank canvas. I went to a talk by the head of REBA that was organised by the Association of Jersey Architects recently, who made this point very, very powerfully. The embodied carbon and the materials within buildings are to be valued. The instinctive and automatic reaction should not be to tear a building down. It should be to think, what can we do with this building? And he gave many examples of imaginative reuse of buildings, sometimes very dramatic changes to the building, but nevertheless reuse of them. On a small island with limited places to get rid of things, we need to be thinking about that. So I would say that I would have failed in this role if we have not made significant progress in developing that reuse, that recycling within our economy. It is vitally important. And I would also second what the Constable of St. Helier said about aesthetics. Aesthetics matter. They are the thing that give us an environment of which we are proud. They raise the spirits. And when we look at redevelopment of sites, whether it's La Collette or whether it's the waterfront or whatever, we should have aesthetics in our mind. We should be creating beauty in this island. And that is another opportunity that sits in front of us. In terms of, members have raised the question about the interaction with the island plan. And I would say that, you know, the proposition calls for the Minister for Infrastructure and Minister for Environment to work together to develop policies in this area. And I would say that for those who worry that that it's too long until the next island plan and we won't be able to make progress, there is already considerable room within the existing island plan to make progress in this area. Policy WER1, waste minimisation, and I'll read it out because I think it just tells you significant work that can be done already. To minimise the waste arising from demolition and construction activity and to recycle, reuse and recover as much as possible of the generated waste materials in accordance with the waste hierarchy, development involving the demolition of substantial structures or with the potential to generate significant quantities of waste material through construction activities, and it even says, such as the development of 5 homes or 200 metres squared of floor space, will only be supported where a satisfactory site waste management plan has been provided. This must include details of opportunities that have been taken to maximise on-site management of waste. Upon the commencement of the development, all waste transactions must be clearly recorded in the site waste management plan and be available for inspection. That is already within the island plan. Now, I think the key question that members will legitimately ask is, to what extent are we actually making that policy bite? And I would say, listening to this assembly, I take great encouragement from feeling that I will have support in ensuring that that policy is enforced and will be taken forward. And I would ask members to think about that when we do bring forward these things and when we get complaints, as we will, from people who say we are putting barriers in the way of development or that it is unreasonable or excessive when we try and pursue these policies. There is, of course, a balance to be struck, and it is right, as the Infrastructure Minister has pointed out, to say that we are in a particular place now, and we cannot pretend that we are not in that place. We are. But as we go forward, yes, we do need to follow these policies, and we do need to think about how construction can adapt to these policies. And I did hold, as last autumn, one of the first things I did as Environment Minister was to hold a Sustainable Construction Summit. And I would say that there is tremendous positivity and energy within the industry to try and solve these issues. They understand too that we live on an island of limited resources, that lots of material has to be imported, that if we could source more of that material from inside the island by recycling, then that would be a good thing. So I think there is energy there to do that. But of course, it does also impose, or could potentially impose, additional costs. And, you know, that will cause tensions. But as I say, I take heart from the mood of this assembly, which to me suggests that we are at last, finally accepting that there are long-term costs that have to be balanced against the short-term costs. And that we already have some policies in that area, but I will look forward very much to working with the Infrastructure Minister to go further, to make sure that we do reduce the amount of material going to those sites, because we can all see that it is in our best interest to do so. We have to do that. It is a limited site. As Deputy Curtis has said, we don't want to spend it all in one go or in a very short time period. So those comments, I hope, are of some help. Somebody asked about what the vision would be. And, you know, a vision for me is to show how we can do green and do development and do them both well. That is what I would like to see. That is a future that will work for business and for the environment. We have to square that circle. We have to. A final point about contamination. I know members are legitimately worried about the potential of contamination. Indeed, there were questions about this in connection with heavy metals yesterday. So I spoke actually to officers yesterday in connection with this, and I can give the following information in connection with heavy metals in seawater, which was a question that was asked yesterday. We do test limpets and seaweed intertidally at Corbière, St Albans Fort, Elizabeth Castle, Havre de Pars and Gorée. Additionally, we test slipper limpets offshore from the seabed on the outside of St Albans Bay, Horn Rock in Brouville Bay and the Ecrihose. The location, scheduling and species used within the testing methodology is designed to monitor levels of heavy metals in proximity to La Colette. The samples at Corbière and Gorée are used as background comparison to the sites either side of the reclamation site. The metals routinely monitored are copper, arsenic, cadmium, chromium, lead and zinc. Occasionally other metals such as mercury will be tested for, and other sites such as the Minkies and the Paternosters are also occasionally tested just to make sure we're getting full coverage. Since 1993, samples have been gathered and tested quarterly, and the results made available through the Marine Resources Annual Report. A detailed analysis was done in 2009, and a new report is currently being prepared. But I can say that the levels of heavy metals are not increasing. Most are decreasing or stable. At present, there is nothing to suggest that heavy metals are at anything other than background levels. So that, I hope, gives some comfort that at the moment we are in a good place with regard to heavy metals. Obviously, that is not a guarantee of future security, but we are not in a bad position at the moment. So I hope members find those comments helpful, and I will sit down, having said everything I have to say.
Thank you, Deputy. Does any other member speak on the proposition? Deputy Felton.
Thank you, sir. I wasn't actually intending to speak, but I've been. I wanted to rise on the basis of what we've just heard from the Environment Minister and his intention to abstain. I thought it was interesting. I can understand his reasoning for doing that as the Minister responsible for planning, but perhaps we need to hear from the Assistant Minister for Environment to hear her views, as she doesn't have that conflict, and I'd also like to hear about how she's going to be voting, because I, like many other members, are feeling very uncomfortable about the position that we are in now. It's a position not of our own making, and it's also one that I'm not entirely sure from the proposition, and I'd like to hear some more clarification from ministers about what the definition of short to medium term is. I'd like to know, it says at the moment the minimum term of medium would be 4 years. I don't know now what the maximum term is. I also have no confidence about when we will see the long-term plan coming to us and being proposed to us. So that does make me feel very uncomfortable. I feel like a number of us feel like we do have our backs against the wall with this one. And that is a highly uncomfortable position to be in. And I really do want to seek some assurances from the Assistant Minister for Environment about where the environment portfolio sits on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy. Conor Thompson-Brillard.
Thank you, sir. We do spend a lot of time in this place talking rubbish, or in more technical terms, solid, hazardous or inert waste. A friend of mine, sir, involved in civil engineering, told me some years ago that contractors make money moving unwanted waste from pillar to post for indecisive government authorities. So from that, I would say to the Minister, let us decide where our waste is to go once and once only. We've experienced waste being dumped on the foreshore of St Helier, as the Constable said. We've seen waste dumped at St Wan's in the area of what is now the sand dunes. And these areas have, as is fair to say, recovered. We've, of course, seen World War II waste dumped over cliffs and at sea. The La Colette reclamation site is an inevitable consequence of a successful economy and is something we have to accept. I would counsel care over suggestions of future land reclamation, however, because we have adjacent to it a Ramsar site, which certainly gives heightened protection to that area. So I would suggest that we meddle with those areas at our peril. I can see the ever-changing site from my office at St Albans, sir, and it's quite surprising to see these changes at a distance. So I would wholeheartedly agree with the Environment Minister in that aesthetics are really important. I believe, importantly, we have much to do on the analysis of waste arisings going into La Collette and how we might deal with it differently. The debacle over the dumping of hazardous waste west of Albert, as we used to call it, was highlighted by the former Senator Stuart Sivray to the chagrin of the government of the day. But of course he was right, and we've been moving it and dealing with those consequences ever since. I heard earlier that we must do better at reutilising recycled aggregate. My understanding, sir, is that the reluctance for its use comes from architects and civil engineers who are suggesting that building insurance may be compromised by its use. I would urge ministers to develop conversations with the industry to overcome this issue and ensure that those recycled aggregates do go into new buildings, even if it's our own state's buildings. I'm less sympathetic, sir, to the construction industry who are causing the problem in conjunction particularly with our government and our quangos with their grandiose schemes. There's much work to be done by those involved in the construction industry, so let's see some serious activity by those directly responsible to minimise the risings going down to La Collette. I do recall during my time as TTS Minister being responsible for the implementation of the early below-ground design cells for the hazardous waste at the time. It was being discussed then how bottom incinerator ash might be converted to aggregate for building use. I don't believe that subsequently occurred. The hazardous fly ash from the incinerator referred to earlier was due to be exported, and I think that did take place. I don't believe it went into cells. But I would like perhaps the Minister to confirm if that were to be the case. Of course, we have the difficulty in the exportation of waste of having to contend with international agreements over the exportation of waste to other countries. And I think it's quite right that that is controlled. I don't think, sir, we have much choice but to accept the Minister's proposals, and the amended proposals, I think, help. But I might conclude with a suggestion in the interests of our heritage and picking up on Deputy Tadia's point that the East Headland might in the future be named La Hwg Binne, and that on the west, La Hwg Rhenodd. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Collector. Collector wasn't Saviour.
Thank you, sir. Following on from the Constable of St Brunard, which is in fact exactly what I did. After the Constable of St Brunard, I became Minister for TTS and later Minister for Infrastructure. It's an interesting thought that we do in fact export, or the infrastructure does export the fly ash. If some members will remember during the occupation, I believe there was 20,000 residents left on the island, and with occupying forces, probably a total of about 55,000. It was near impossible to feed the entire population at that time. Of course, everybody was very grateful for the arrival of the SS Vega. But ever since I can remember, there's been great shipments of food coming to the island, and as a result, most of the trucks go back empty. So it was quite expedient that a lot of the fly ash was put on the trucks and sent to the UK for reprocessing. Also, old fridges, old TVs, anything that could be recycled. Instead of the trucks going back empty, they're loaded up with all our recyclables and sent back. but also believe that we're looking for a solution now. In fact, I think we are all, everyone on the island responsible for the problem. Everyone that puts rubbish in the bin or uses a wash machine or shower or flushes the loo, we are all part of the problem. And we have to find a solution to this. It is a massive problem, and we're left with very few choices. That we do recycle what we can. I would like to see greater reuse at La Colette. The people down at La Colette do a fantastic job. One is only to go down over a weekend and see the amount of people that have cleared out sheds and garages, and they're recycling everything from metals, glass, and wood and everything going into various spots. Perhaps the Minister would inform the Assembly when the recycling centre is going to reopen again, because I believe that's still closed. So I would like to see that open again. But as I say, we have a tremendous amount of work to do. We have very, very few choices with what we could do with the refuse at the moment. And just if I may correct Deputy Ward, I think it was a slip of the tongue. It's an energy from waste plant, not energy to waste, which in fact it does work quite well. The old incinerator, as was in Belazan, it was in very poor condition and it did need upgrading. So it was decided to put before I joined the Assembly, it was decided to put it down at La Colette, directly next door to the power station. So refuse is burnt, steam is generated, that steam turns a turbine generator, and that electricity flows straight through to the JEC, hence energy from waste. And I believe it's between 4 and 7% of the island's electricity comes from this particular unit. Of course, there is a byproduct, which is the fly ash, which is exported, and the bottom ash, which is sieved, and the metals are extracted and recycled, but we are left with the bottom ash, that's for sure, which we have to dispose of. So I don't see any other alternative at the moment, but I think the Minister for Infrastructure has a tough job, and I wish him well. and with that said, I will be supporting this proposition, sir, because that's the only thing we can do at the moment. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Madam. Does any other member speak on this proposition? Deputy Southern.
Thank you, sir. And I'll be very brief, as we've had numerous contributions, some of which have been worthwhile today. And I'm really faced for the first time this session with the cry, "We're doomed," as they used to say on Dad's Army. We're doomed. Unless we vote for the proposition before us today, we're doomed. Because what we have to do, unless we vote for this policy, is to close down building on the island. Full stop. Hospital, out the door. Schools, out the door. All those flats, stop. Is that the reality? We've talked about the time scale in which we can do things. And I think I've got an idea of what that time scale is. Within 3 years, we'll have a new policy and we'll have solved this problem and we'll be able to come to the States with full answers. That's not a problem. But hang on, 3 years is within the life cycle of how long we last in here. So no doubt, and I'm absolutely convinced with this, we can actually kick the can down the road to make that 4 years. Why does that make a difference? Because then we don't have to make a decision. It'll be somebody else's decision where they're facing, we're doomed. It's also, I've heard today, the prospect of a 10-year plan. We talk about, is this medium term, is it long term? Those 3 years, stroke 4 years, I'm suggesting, certainly the Minister said today, might even stretch to 10 years. And the can will be kicked down for 10 years. Is that, as I face the possibility of pressing pour or contre today, I'm thinking about the previous Deputy of St Martin's phrase about this is a vote where you need to hold your nose. And I think at the moment I'm holding my nose and voting for a scenario that says we can get by for the moment. Let's put the decision off for 3, 4 or 10 years down the road, because that's what effectively we'll be doing. We won't be solving anything. We're just saying there's a new plan along the way, there's a new bus along the way, a policy along the way that we can get behind when the time comes. But what we're told today is not the time.
Thank you, Deputy. If no one wishes to speak, then I call upon the Minister to reply. Minister.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to thank everybody for their contributions. As Deputy Southern suggests, some have been more useful than others, and whilst he's not here, I'd like to thank the Environment Minister for his balanced comments. So I won't be long in summing up because I know we've got a busy few days ahead of us, but I think I will start by just picking one of the paragraphs that I thought carefully about before making my speech, sir, and it's in relation to hazardous waste, and it says, however much we might be concerned about the location of its storage, and the method of its ongoing management, we shouldn't have and don't deserve the luxury of simply expressing outrage and standing back as if everyone else is to blame. And I've been rather saddened today, sir, that a number of members have chosen to do precisely that. This is a very complicated problem. It's been many, many years in the making, and I think we've all contributed to it in one way and another. And just picking up on one or two of the points that were made, I always find Deputy Tudyer extremely amusing, sir, but I just wonder if he's ever put a bag of rubbish out to be collected by a bin lorry that's found its way to the incinerator for disposal. There we are. And I wonder if he recycles everything that he uses, and if he's reducing his use of everything, sir. It may be that he's got a composting toilet at home, and he might wear a hair shirt at the weekend, so I don't quite know. But I wonder sometimes when people stand up to speak if they give sufficient thought to their own activities before casually standing back and telling people how very uncomfortable they are. And I know some people have expressed that they've been very uncomfortable. Well, let me tell you, sir, I'm very uncomfortable because I've been here 65 years and I've watched our waterfront be ruined by various people that have sat in this chamber. And as I say, I've contributed to that myself, as has everybody else in here. So I was going to make an awful lot, well, I will make a couple of other points because I want to explain a little bit about recycling. My understanding is that we manage to recycle 40% of our inert waste, and that's twice as much as the UK manages. And this is probably something that not a lot of people know, but with inert waste, you can't use it for structural concrete. And there's a ceiling limit, therefore, on what we can do. What we are working on as a department, so is trying to find a way of getting every batch of recycled material that we can verified in the hope that that can be used in structural concrete. We'd probably be the first people to achieve that, but that's what we're trying to do. So, in closing, I'd like to assure everybody that we're being told we're kicking the can down the road, it'll be 10 years. There's no 10-year plan. What I did say is that I hope the site could last for 10 years. There's a very, very serious approach being taken to this, and I'm only planning to serve one term, sir, and I'm going to make every effort to do as much as I can in that term to make as much change as I possibly can. And I think on that note, I'll end it. And thank everybody. Thank you, sir.
Is the appel called for?
Yes, sir.
The appel has been called for. I invite members to return to their seats. invite the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce the proposition has been adopted. 39 votes pour, 3 votes contre, and 2 abstentions.
No, in the two, please.
Those voting contre, the Connétable of St Helier, Deputy Tadier and Deputy Howell, and the abstentions were the Connétable of St Lawrence and Deputy Reniff.
The next item is the draft EU legislation, information accompanying transfer funds amendment Jersey regulations, lodged by the Chief Minister. The main respondent is the Chair of the Corporate Services Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft EU legislation, information accompanying transfer of funds, amendment Jersey Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 2 of the European Union Legislation Implementation Jersey Law 2014.
Deputy Mayor, are you rapporteur for this one?
Yes, sir, thank you.
I invite you to propose the principles.
Sir, Jersey's work on a national level, the forthcoming assessment by Moneyval continues at pace with the on-site visit scheduled for September 2023. One important topic for the Financial Action Task Force is the regulation of cryptocurrencies, digital assets and respective service providers, which are referred to in FATF standards as virtual assets and virtual asset service providers, or just VASPs. Virtual assets can be used for illegitimate and criminal purposes, and therefore it's important to regulate these activities to prevent and detect crime. VASPs were added to Schedule 2 to the Proceeds of Crime Law in January this year and are therefore now required to comply with all requirements of the Proceeds of Crime Law and the Money Laundering Order in respect of anti-money laundering and the countering of the financing of terrorism. The FATF standards require financial institutions, especially banks, to include accurate payer and payee information for wire transfers of traditional funds and ensure that the information remains with the wire transfer throughout the payment chain, thereby enabling law enforcement agencies to track these transfers and obtain relevant information where required. The FATF requirement regarding wire transfer information has been transposed already into Jersey law with the EU legislation Information Accompanying Transfer of Funds, Jersey Regulations 2017, in short, the Wire Transfer Regulations, which applies to payment service providers, although is currently limited only to banks. Over 2019 and 2020, FATF revised its Recommendation 15 to extend the requirements regarding wire transfer information to virtual asset service providers for the cases where they transfer virtual assets as well as to money or value transfer services. Thus, and to continue Jersey's policy of compliance with FATF recommendations, I have lodged this proposition which, if adopted, amends the wire transfer regulations. It will align Jersey's AML and CFT requirements regarding the transfers of funds with the FATF requirements. The proposed draft regulations will, if adopted, bring virtual asset service providers and money or value transfer services into the scope of the wire transfer regulations by including those businesses in the definition of payment services providers. However, it's proposed to exempt payment services providers from the requirements of the wire transfer regulations in respect of a transfer of virtual assets of less than €1,000 if the payer and payee are both VASPs. This de minimis amount is permitted under FATF Recommendation 16 and is similar to the approach taken in the UK. It's important to note that this de minimis amount only applies to the transfer of information as part of the payment chain, and all other AML and CFT obligations apply as usual. This exemption will not apply, however, if a payment service provider considered a transfer of virtual assets to represent a higher risk of money laundering, and if the payer is a VASP but the payee is not, or if the payer is not a VASP and the payee is, irrespective of the amount transferred. Again, this approach mirrors the UK approach. The draft regulations have been subject to public consultation, and the responses to the consultation were fully supportive of the amendments. Inevitably, there will be certain areas where industry will benefit from additional guidance on certain aspects of the practical implementation of these changes, and government will support the Jersey Financial Services Commission with the provision of such guidance where appropriate and where required. These draft regulations, if adopted, form another important building block to achieve better compliance with the FATF recommendations ahead of the Moneyval assessment, and will enable law enforcement agencies to better track any criminal funds if necessary. But this also makes these amendments suitable to ensure that Jersey remains an attractive, well-regulated and forward-looking international finance centre in the area of virtual and crypto assets, and I therefore recommend the proposition to the Assembly for adoption. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Are the principles seconded?
They are, sir.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the principles? Thank you. Those members in favour of adopting the principles kindly show. Thank you very much. The principles are adopted. Deputy Scott, does the Economic International Affairs Scrutiny Panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
Sir, we already have and won't be calling it in. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, how do you propose the regulations in second reading?
I'd like to take the regulations on block, please, sir.
Yes. Are the regulations seconded?
Indeed they are, sir. Thank you.
Does anyone wish to speak on the regulations? Those members in favour of adopting the regulations kindly show. Thank you very much. The regulations are adopted in second reading. Minister, do you propose the regulations in third reading?
Yes, sir, I do. Thank you.
Are the regulations seconded?
They are.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak on the regulations as adopted? Those members in favour, please kindly show.
Call for the appel, sir.
The appel has been called for. Members are invited to return to their seats, and the Assembly is considering whether or not to adopt the regulations in third reading. I invite the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. I ask the greffier to close the voting. And I can announce that the regulations have been adopted unanimously, 40 votes for. Next item is the draft employment amendment number 13, Jersey Law, P38, lodged by the Minister for Social Security. The name respondent is the Chair of Health and Social Security Scrutiny Panel. I'll ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Employment Amendment Number 13, Jersey Law 2000, a law to further amend the Employment Jersey Law 2003 and related legislation. The States, subject to the sanction of His Most Excellent Majesty in Council, have adopted the following law.
Minister.
Thank you, sir. For many years, the way in which the minimum wage rate and the offset rates for meals and accommodation have been set have differed. The minimum wage rate is currently set by ministerial order, and the offset rates, which are the amounts that an employer is allowed to deduct where they provide food or accommodation, are set by regulations following the agreement of this Assembly. In its 2022 report on the minimum wage, the Employment Forum recommended that, in future, both be set by ministerial order. I've accepted the Forum's recommendation, and this proposition, if agreed to by the Assembly, makes that change. So this is a common sense and hopefully uncontroversial change. The ability to set both rates by ministerial order harmonises the process and will give greater flexibility. In terms of legislative oversight, any member of this Assembly will continue to be able to submit a motion to annul a proposed rate or to lodge a proposition to amend a proposed rate, so there continues to be effective scrutiny of the process. In making any order, the recommendations of the Employment Forum will continue to play an important part in the process and the determining of those rates. So I'm also taking this opportunity to make an important amendment in respect of the provisions contained in the employment law which prohibit the setting of wage rates which would treat different people differently in relation to certain criteria. At the moment, that prohibition extends only to the protected characteristics of race and gender. The employment law was brought in around 10 years before our discrimination law was introduced. This proposition, if adopted, will extend that prohibition to all of the protected characteristics now contained in the discrimination law. In addition, this amendment to the employment law has been drafted in such a way that any future additions to the list of protected characteristics in the discrimination law will be caught automatically in the employment law and will not require separate legislative amendments. Thank you, sir. I maintain the principles.
Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the principles?
Yes, sir. And I'll rise to my feet to ask whether the Minister is prepared to take, whether there are parts to this proposition, because I fundamentally object to the Minister taking decisions by order. Again, the House can, the Assembly can only alter things which are done by ministerial order by rescinding what's going on. And I think the control of this House is a danger from such actions.
Thank you. Does any other member speak on the principles? Yes, Deputy Tullier.
It just follows on from that. So would the Minister answer that if a new characteristic is added that doesn't currently exist, that presumably would have to come back to the Assembly because it's, I'm guessing, it's part of a different law. Can she just confirm that?
Does any other member speak on the principles? I call upon the Minister to reply.
Thank you, sir. Just looking at the proposition very quickly, I think it would be difficult to extract parts of it to discuss separate elements of the proposition. However, sir, if I could respond to Deputy Southern's comment, moving the setting of the offset rates from a regulation-making power of this Assembly to an order-making power doesn't restrict opportunities for scrutiny and debate by this Assembly. Over the last 13 years of the minimum wage being set by ministerial order, backbench propositions to amend the rate have been lodged no fewer than 11 times, mostly, I believe, by Deputy Southern. So that ability, the ability to challenge any setting either of the minimum wage and the offset rates will absolutely continue. And I would absolutely expect that in future, when we have made a decision about offset rates and the minimum wage, that we will, of course, notify the scrutiny panel in advance of making those public. So I hope the House, the Assembly will accept that there is no intention to deny them to deny members the ability to challenge the setting of the minimum wage or the offsets by virtue of this proposition. In response to Deputy Tadier, if we were to add a protected characteristic, then that would come before this Assembly. I believe it would come as an amendment to the discrimination law. If we were to add, I don't want to pluck one out of there, if we were to add a new characteristic of people having blonde hair are protected, then that would come to the Assembly for debate. But then once that characteristic had been adopted into the discrimination law, it would automatically flow through into the employment law. So I hope that answers Deputy Tadier's question.
I mean, can I seek clarification on that? So, just as...
Are you prepared to give clarification?
Yes, sir.
Yes, Deputy.
So thank you for that first part. So, if we adopted a new characteristic and amended the discrimination law, does it automatically change this law, or does the Minister have to make that change by order?
No, sir. Sorry, sir. As I understand, we're making the change now because the employment law changes to the discrimination law of protected characteristics don't automatically flow through into the employment law. So at the moment, the employment law is behind the discrimination law, and that it only recognises 2 of the protected characteristics. So this is correcting that deficit, if you like. And what the amendment does is say that if a change is made to the discrimination law, it automatically flows through to the employment law. So we should not need to make that change again in future.
So, could I have a point of clarification,
yes,
if I may, from the Minister? Does that mean that as a result of what is happening, but the changes that are happening today, the rights become statutory?
Yes, sir, I believe they are statutory. As I understand it, that what the law does at present is it states that you cannot set different wages, you cannot set different wage rates for different types of people, but only if you're discriminating on the grounds of sex and race. So you could technically, at the moment, I believe, set a different wage rate for someone with a different protected characteristic, say religious belief. So this is harmonising. Sorry, that's not a protected characteristic. That's one of the ones I've been discussing with Deputy Ferry. Sorry, let me just tell you I have a list of the protected characteristics somewhere in my notes. Yes. So at the moment, the prohibition of setting different wage rates for people only apply where there's race and sex. Our other protected characteristics are sexual orientation, gender reassignment, pregnancy and maternity, age and disability. So what that means is that from now on, if we adopt this proposition, an employer would not be able to pay someone with a disability less than they pay someone without a disability. And in future, if that list of protected characteristics is extended, then it will flow through automatically into law. I do believe it's a positive change, sir.
Thank you, Minister. Is the appel called for?
Yes, please, sir.
Yes. If it has been called for, members are invited to return to their seats. I ask the greffier to open the voting. All members have had the opportunity of casting their votes. Then I ask the greffier to close the voting. I can announce that the principle has been adopted unanimously, 42 votes for. Deputy Rob Ward, does the Health and Social Security panel wish to scrutinise this matter?
No, sir. Can I just make one point about, or should I speak in regulations?
It's about the regulations and...
I could just say that there's just one thing I would point out. When something is made by order by a minister and the scrutiny panel is informed, there's informing a scrutiny panel and there's informing a scrutiny panel. And I think the larger the time span for a scrutiny panel, I think most chairs of most members of panels would agree that that's a very important point to be making. It cannot be a token gesture of informing the panel the day before the ministerial order was made, because scrutiny cannot be made. So I just want to raise that point because it's a very important point for the process of scrutiny within this assembly. So, but no, we won't be calling it in. Thank you, sir.
Understood, thank you. Minister, how do you wish to propose the articles in second reading?
May I propose them on block, sir?
Are the articles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the articles? Accordingly, I invite members to kindly show if they're in support of the articles in second reading. Thank you very much. The articles are adopted. Minister, do you wish to propose the draft law in third reading?
Yes, I do, sir. Thank you.
Is that seconded?
Yes, sir.
Does any member wish to speak on the articles as adopted in third reading? All those in favour, please kindly show. Thank you very much. The law is adopted in third reading. We now move to the draft Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Licensing Jersey Regulations, lodged by the Minister for the Environment. The main respondent is the Chair of the Environment, Housing and Infrastructure Scrutiny Panel. I ask the greffier to read the citation.
Draft Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Licensing Jersey Regulations 2000. The states make these regulations under Article 5 of the Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Jersey Law 2018.
Now, under Standing Order 106, in relation to similar debates, members have declared an interest as a landlord or as a tenant, as required under Article 106(1), but those members can go on to vote, as this is an interest shared by more than a small number of other people. So in relation to declarations of interest, it might be appropriate for us to adopt a sort of Mexican wave approach and start from here and go around. I think perhaps if you stand up, put your butt so the greffier can put your light on, has no doubt about what the declaration is. Yes, Conatable of St Clement, I'll start with you.
So my declaration is I'm both a landlord and a tenant in equal measure, although I do rent some commercial accommodation.
Thank you very much. Deputy Alex Curtis.
I can declare I am a landlord in the respect of one unit where I live.
Thank you. Any more declarations over here?
Yes, I mean, I'm a landlord, but only for family members. No other third parties, and I'm a landlord in the UK.
Thank you very much. Deputy War.
Yep. Yeah, my business owns 3 units of accommodation which we rent.
Thank you very much. Deputy Tom Binney.
I'm landlord also.
Thank you very much. Deputy Jern.
Yes, I'm a landlord of commercial and also of residential and also a tenant.
Deputy Howell.
I'm a landlord of a family member.
Thank you. Deputy Rose Binney.
I'm a landlord.
Thank you.
I have a reversionary interest in as a landlord.
Thank you very much. Deputy Tadia.
Thanks, sir. I have a quarter interest in a house which is currently let, but that will change in exactly 1 month, so I'll no longer be a landlord in 1 month's time, but my wife is a landlord.
Thank you very much. Deputy Gorst.
Yes, I'm a landlord.
I'm a landlord too, family members.
Deputy Mezek.
I'm a tenant.
Thank you. Deputy Kovac.
I'm a tenant, is it?
Deputy Catherine Curtis.
I'm currently a tenant.
Thank you very much. Any other declarations? Yes, Deputy Wilson.
So I'm a tenant.
Thank you. Deputy Balash.
I'm a landlord, sir, but I'm not declaring an interest.
Right.
Sorry, sir,
Can we ju-
I'm a tenant as well.
Deputy Tellier,
Can we get clarification on what Deputy Ballas just said?
I don't think you're entitled to clarification. He's made
He
his
said he's not
declaration.
declaring an interest, but is the ruling not that every landlord has to declare an interest?
Well, he has declared that he's a landlord, so he has declared an interest. So it seems to me. Right, Deputy.
Sir, may I declare I'm a potential landlord as well, sir?
Any other declarations we're missing? Constable St Mary, yes.
Yes, so I intervene there, sir. I put a message in the chaps. Yes, I am a potential landlord in that I have a property which I anticipate shortly will be let. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Constable. Minister.
Thank you, sir. And I should say I'm a tenant as well. So let me talk first about why I'm bringing this proposition before this Assembly. To bring new regulations, I believe that 3 conditions must be met. There must be proven need, a problem that we are trying to solve. There must be an effective method by which it may be solved. And the method proposed, excuse me, sir. And the method proposed to solve the problem must be proportionate to the problem being addressed. It must not impose an excessive regulatory burden. I believe these regulations meet all 3 conditions, and I'd like to explain why. Looking at the problem first, I want to be very clear. We have a significant problem in Jersey with unsafe housing conditions. Environmental health officers receive between 125 and 200 complaints, if you look back over the last few years, relating to unsafe housing conditions. So far this year, there have been 115 complaints. They include a number of complaints about mold, damp, excessive cold, dangerous electrics, and so on. There is good reason to think that there are a lot more cases than those that get reported to us. We know that people are reluctant to come forward, partly because they fear the repercussions, but also because, I'm afraid to say, many think there is no point. Therefore, we do not only rely on complaints to the department, because we know that not everyone comes to government when they have a problem. We know from other agencies that there are significant issues with housing quality. The charity Caritas are contacted by around 200 people a year who are desperate for help because of their living conditions. The Citizens Advice Bureau also report that they deal with dozens of cases every year relating to poor quality housing. I have spoken to both these organisations, and they are clear that terrible housing conditions are a frequent issue raised with them. If you still don't believe there's an issue, then perhaps listen to the voices of some of our young people. In Life on the Rock, a report published by the Children's Commission, we find the story of a girl called Sophie, whose situation was described like this. The house was not to an acceptable standard with, at various times, mould on the walls, a smashed door, a garden falling apart, and a rat infestation, which the landlord refused to address, and Sophie's parents couldn't afford to fix. I have myself spoken to a teacher who has experience from home visits of terrible conditions, particularly mould, damp, and cold, in the homes of primary school children at her school in town. She found it heartbreaking to see the day-to-day struggles of children trying to do their best in such awful conditions. And I must say I do too. So to those who say there is not enough evidence of the problem, or that the problem is minuscule, I say no. There is evidence. There is data. I've outlined the evidence here, and there is more in the reports that accompanies this proposition. There is nothing hidden about the problem of poor quality housing. Like Nelson holding his telescope to his blind eye, maybe there are those who do not wish to see. But I say to this Assembly, those people living in unsafe housing are not invisible. They are here. They do speak up. They do put the evidence in front of us. It is not hidden. You can choose not to see what is in front of you. You can choose to minimize the problem. You can choose to ignore the problem if you wish. I am not prepared to ignore the evidence. It is important when we consider the impact of these proposals on landlords that we remember the people who these regulations are designed to help. When we talk about unsafe housing conditions, there is sometimes a temptation to belittle the issue, as if there are no real consequences, or as if these conditions are not really about safety and public health. And I think this is wrong. First, it's wrong at a simple human level. No one in Jersey should be forced to live in unsafe housing. This is the 21st century, not the 19th. It should shame us all that those conditions still exist. But it goes deeper than this. There is a very large body of evidence linking poor housing conditions with poor health. Ever since the link between cholera and sanitation was established in the 1840s, we've known that the quality of housing is a key determinant of health and of life outcomes. Let us all remember that it is only a few months since a UK coroner determined that the death of a child, Awab Ishak, was caused by black mould that his housing provider had failed to deal with despite multiple complaints. My colleague, the Health Minister, will address some of the health issues in more detail later. But let me make a general point. Sir, we all pay for poor health conditions. We all pay for the working days lost to ill health. We all pay for the stunted life chances of our young people. We all pay for the potential that goes unfulfilled. We pay literally in higher health costs, and we pay in terms of people not being able to contribute in the way that they might have. We pay in the loss of hope, the despair, the lack of dignity that erodes the ability of people struggling to play a full part in society. So whenever I started a new project at the BBC, I used to ask my team, what's stopping you doing your best work? And you always hope at that point that no one puts their hand up and says, you. But to a large extent, I saw my job as removing the obstacles that prevent people doing their best work. The same is true here. My aim in bringing these regulations forward is to remove one of the most significant barriers that prevents some of the most disadvantaged and vulnerable people in society from doing their best work and from being the best people they could be. So what's stopping us doing that now? Here we get to the nub of the issue. So the problem we have is this. We already have a law that sets minimum standards, the 2018 Public Health and Safety Rented Dwellings Jersey Law, but we do not have adequate means to enforce it. The system relies on tenants to raise issues with us. We have no knowledge of where rented properties are, never mind which ones are in bad condition. We cannot conduct random inspections because we do not know which properties are in bad condition or even which properties are rented. We are blind. Our only avenue is when we are contacted by a tenant who draws our attention to a problem. In the majority of cases, as I've already pointed out, tenants do not wish us to take action. They fear being made homeless, they fear their tenancy not being renewed, they fear getting a reputation as a difficult tenant. So they simply wish us to be aware of the conditions in which they are forced to live. Regularly, officers attempt to persuade tenants to take the matter further, but in most cases, tenants refuse. There's a further problem. Even if someone does bring a complaint forward, the means of enforcement is cumbersome, time-consuming, and off-putting. The only means to enforce against the landlord who refuses to make improvements is a criminal prosecution. But criminal prosecution is a high bar to cross. To be effective, in most cases, it requires a tenant prepared to pursue a complaint, to stay the course, and to identify themselves publicly. So in many cases, these are people living on the margins of our society. In the stressed and difficult world in which they live, this is not realistic. Officers also face an exceptionally time-consuming task in building a case that will meet the threshold of criminal prosecution. All the while they build this case, they cannot be working on other enforcement cases. Even when they've completed the case, there is always the possibility that the Attorney General will decide a prosecution is not in the public interest. To date, there have been no successful prosecutions. So, in summary, we have a significant problem and it cannot be adequately enforced through existing means. So, what is proposed? The 2018 law says under Section 3, Part 1, that the Minister shall be responsible for introducing measures to ensure minimum standards of health and safety to be met by rented dwellings. Sir, Section 3 says that I have a legal duty to ensure the safety of residential dwellings. A legal duty. It is a duty I take very seriously. In November 2018, my predecessor used his powers under the law to make an order that established minimum standards across 29 categories. They included damp and mould, excessive cold, overcrowding, lack of lighting and electrical hazards, amongst others. That law and the accompanying order have now been in place for more than 4 years, and it is worth reminding ourselves that meeting these standards is a legal requirement. It is not voluntary. Failure to do so is a criminal offence. Under Section 5, Part 1 of the law, it goes on to say, the states may by regulations establish a scheme for the purpose of further ensuring the safety of rented dwellings and the health and safety of persons occupying such dwellings. This is what I propose to do, because licensing gives us the tools to tackle the two big problems we face: lack of knowledge of where rented problem properties are and the inability to enforce compliance effectively. And I should just remind members at this point that we are talking about licensing of private rented dwellings, or rented dwellings, not of landlords. I know it's a convenient alliteration to say landlord licensing. We do not license and do not propose to license landlords. And that has an actual practical effect, because it means that if a property is licensed under the scheme and sold, the license remains in place. It is the property that is licensed. You do not need to relicense when a property is sold. So here is how the scheme will work. All dwellings defined as being under the scope of the 2018 law will require a licence. In applying for a licence, a landlord will effectively be self-certifying that the dwelling meets the minimum standards and is compliant with the law. A licence will last for 2 years and cost £60, in other words, £30 a year. I calculate that that is 0.1 to 0.2% of a typical annual rental. I'm advised it's also a tax-deductible business expense. Landlords who are already renting will be able to apply for a licence for their rented dwellings without pre-inspection if the application is made before 31st March 24. This will enable landlords and managing agents to continue business as usual and will therefore not have any negative impact on the availability of rented accommodation. After that, applications may have an inspection. I emphasise may because in most instances it is unlikely there will be an inspection. That's because inspections will be done on a risk-assessed basis. If, for example, a property is brand new or recently renovated, we wouldn't expect there to be an inspection. There would be no need, and that would be a waste of regulatory resource. So the scheme will deliver three key benefits. First, a licensing scheme will allow officers for the first time to have a comprehensive set of data regarding rented dwellings. They can then apply a risk-based approach to inspection, seeking out accommodation that falls below minimum standards, and working with these landlords to bring them into compliance. Secondly, licensing will allow us to tackle the problem of tenants who are reluctant to bring forward complaints. Officers will have a complete list of rented dwellings and will be conducting a number of random inspections. So a landlord will never know if the reason they are being inspected is because of a complaint or because of a random selection. This will mean that tenants can bring forward complaints without fear of being victimised. Finally, instead of relying on a criminal prosecution under the 2018 law to enforce the law, officers will have at their disposal a flexible enforcement tool. They will be able to impose conditions on a licence so that improvements must be made or else the licence may be withdrawn. I know there are worries about overzealous enforcement. I would say this. Regulation is under new management. Since January last year, there's been a new Group Director of Regulation. Since last July, there's been a new Minister. The approach to enforcement that the Department adopts is a four-phased approach. Engage, explain, encourage, and enforce. Initially, officers will work to try with relevant parties to ensure matters are dealt with in appropriate timescales, safeguarding the health and safety of tenants. Only if there is reluctance on the part of a landlord to comply will the possibility of licence removal come into view. And I'd say members were asking yesterday about regulation and whether some areas of regulation were being properly enforced and so on. I think it's fair to say that I receive more complaints from people who are worried that we are not enforcing regulation enough, rather than overzealous regulation. And I think some members here will have written me letters to that effect. We are not running a department of people who jump in feet first and try and enforce regulations in a small-minded or pernickety way. It is a difficult balance to strike, but I am absolutely committed to dealing with the problem of unsafe housing. I am not interested in dealing with properties or landlords with properties that are not in that category. It is a complete waste of time to do so. So let me deal finally with some objections to licensing. Let me start by saying that whilst I have heard many objections to the scheme, one particular objection has been striking by its absence. Not one person that I've heard has argued that the scheme will not work. Nobody has argued that the licensing scheme I am proposing will fail to meet its objective, namely to enable more effective action against substandard rental dwellings. It seems to be accepted that licensing will enable the better enforcement of minimum standards. The argument against hinges on proportionality. In the time-honoured phrase, this is a sledgehammer to crack a nut. This is not a sledgehammer. So I'm not in favour of regulation for the sake of it. Some members may remember that I was notably cautious about estate agent regulation when it was raised a few months ago, because unlike the condition of rented dwellings, there have been very few complaints about estate agents. I'm glad to say we reached a good position on that. I am in favour of regulation when there is a clearly identified problem and a proportionate solution. And I believe these regulations meet that definition. I've frequently been told that licensing is an example of excessive red tape or bureaucratic overload. Let's take a look at another occupation for comparison. It's always good to put things into perspective, isn't it? What about fishing? Every fishing vessel must have a license, obviously. Just as under this scheme, every property would need a license. So fishers also have to deal with this burden. But that is just the beginning. Every vessel is required to fill in a log sheet detailing what they have caught, the weight of that, the gears used to catch it, the amount of time they were fishing, and the location. And that is every single time they go fishing, and whether they catch anything or not. If they don't get their log sheets in on time, they are liable to have their license suspended or be fined. That, sir, is a regulatory burden, justified, I should add, by the need to manage our fish stocks appropriately. Now let's compare that with licensing of rented dwellings. The bureaucracy and red tape that is so frequently cited as a significant new burden to landlords amounts to one form to fill in every 2 years. One form every 2 years, with a series of drop-down menus to help make it easy to fill in. And when it comes to renewal, if nothing has changed, then in many cases it will simply be a case of reconfirming the existing data fields. So I don't deny it is work, but really, one form every 2 years. An excessive burden? I think not. I think to a significant extent, some landlords are fighting a monster that doesn't exist. So I do not accept the argument that this additional bureaucracy imposed on landlords, as highlighted, for example, in the round-robin email members were sent, is going to lead to landlords selling up. It would be absurd to sell up because of a single form every 2 years. I note in passing that the bureaucracy involved in selling a house is considerably greater than the licensing I am proposing. It's also argued that the real cost will be in mission creep. The government will expand to police the licensing scheme. This is based on a misunderstanding. We do not need to recruit new people to run the licensing scheme. We already have 6 officers dealing with housing standards. They are employed to police or enforce the 2018 law. The problem, as I've already said, is they cannot do their job effectively and efficiently. Armed with the licensing scheme, those officers will no longer be hamstrung. I am happy to commit, as I have in meetings with the JLA, that I have no intention of seeking more officers to enforce the law. There is no need. We have the people. They just need the tools to do their job efficiently. Licensing will give them those tools. And I'm also prepared to commit here that I will not seek to increase the price of a license beyond that which would be allowed by inflation. So I've heard it said that licensing will negatively impact productivity at a time when we urgently need to increase it. I would turn that argument on its head, because this is a very one-sided understanding of what this proposition is all about. The impact on productivity of filling in one form every 2 years is minimal. But there will be a productivity gain from those people who will no longer be off sick because of the debilitating effects of cold apartments, or because of the sickness caused by living in a home with mold, or because of the stress of living in overcrowded homes. People living in decent homes are more productive than people living in unsafe conditions. Children growing up in decent homes achieve more than those growing up in overcrowded, damp, or inadequately heated homes. So productivity will be increased through this scheme, not reduced. So the JLA and several people who have written to members have asked why we have not gone for a register rather than licensing. This I find a curious argument because, as I've explained to them on several occasions, the regulatory burden, the red tape, is exactly the same for a register as it is for licensing. Identical. The same data fields filled in using the same software at the same cost. If you find the red tape of a register acceptable, then you must by definition also find the red tape of licensing acceptable. The JLA argued that a register of rented properties would give us the same information as licensing, so we would know where all rental properties are located. This is true, but that is all it does. It misses this crucial second part of the equation, the ability to use licenses to enforce improvements in a flexible and efficient way. A register is just a list, no more, no less. A license gives permission to act, and that permission can be withdrawn. That is the crucial extra power that is needed and that licensing provides. It is sometimes argued that the real costs of this scheme will be to drive up the cost of housing as standards are enforced. So I utterly reject this argument. The standards that are being enforced are minimum safety standards. They have been in place for 4 years. They are compulsory, and all properties should already be meeting them. There should be no extra costs for landlords because they should already be meeting these standards. But where there are non-compliant properties, I do not accept that we should be deterred from bringing them up to standard because it may lead to an increase in rent. No, sir. We should no more accept unsafe housing standards in return for cheaper rent than we would accept lower airline safety standards in return for cheaper airfares. Safety is basic and non-negotiable. So finally, let me address an issue which is not directly relevant to this proposition, but has nevertheless been raised. It is the idea that because this licensing scheme comes at the same time as other measures such as tenancy reform and further into the future environmental performance certificates are being proposed, and this all adds up to be too much. And therefore, perhaps we should be doing all of this together in one big go. Although I can guarantee that were we to try and do that, somebody would stand up and say, why are you mixing up all these things? They're clearly different and should be dealt with separately. But let me address the fundamental point behind that. The issue of safety in rental dwellings is the bedrock of tenancy. It is the first and fundamental thing we should be guaranteeing. Any other changes that we make sit on top of that. It is not a negotiation. We do not trade off rental safety against tenancy reform or against other aspects. Rental safety is fundamental and basic, and I do not believe it should be mixed up. And we will vote on licensing today, and if it passes, then we will get a separate chance to vote on tenancy reform. And we will get a separate vote to vote on other things that might affect them. There's nothing in what we do decide today of licensing means that we are committed to any course of action in the future on these other regulatory or other contractual matters. Those things are still out for consultation, still being discussed with everyone. We have no idea what's going to come forward. It is not appropriate for us to stop this most basic element of housing to be held up whilst we mix it up with other things which are not directly relevant. So in conclusion, we are talking here about helping the less well off, and indeed some of the most vulnerable in our society. I spoke in my election campaign about needing to make Jersey an island that works for everyone. A similar theme was developed by the Council of Ministers in the Common Strategic Priorities with its goal of making Jersey an island where everyone can thrive. You cannot thrive if you live in squalid accommodation. You cannot thrive if you live in fear of retribution should you have the temerity to complain. You cannot thrive when you see your problems ignored or belittled in society. Sir, I came into politics to try and make Jersey a better place for everyone who lives here. I accept that licensing will impose a small additional burden on landlords or their agents, but it is not a big burden. I repeat, it is one form every 2 years, £60 every 2 years. It may be a bit of a pain, a mild irritant, but let us set that against the gains. Remember, no one has argued that licensing will not achieve the objective of enabling us to better tackle unsafe housing. So finally, with licensing, we get to tackle unsafe housing conditions. Finally, we treat the problem of squalid housing seriously. Finally, we give ourselves the tools to enforce the law. We will not solve every housing problem if this proposition is passed. Far from it. But in all honesty, I say to the Assembly, this is one of the easier things we can do. It's not a new tax. It's not even a new law. It's just a way to effectively and efficiently enforce the existing law. Sir, this proposition tackles a known problem in an efficient and effective way with a minimum of regulatory footprint. Let us show we care. I move the principles.
Thank you, Minister. Are the principles seconded?
Yes, sir.
Deputy Balash.
Sir, the Minister seemed quite emotional as he began to move the principles of these regulations. And I want to say that I agree with him, and I'm sure all members agree with him, that it is quite intolerable that disadvantaged people should be required to live in substandard accommodation and that landlords should do nothing about it. But I think it's a mistake to demonize all landlords. The vast majority of landlords are decent and honourable people who do the best they can to look after their tenants. It is a small minority that cause the problems, and they should be relentlessly pursued. So I would vote for these regulations if I thought that they did any good for tenants for landlords or indeed the government. Unfortunately, it seems to me that they fail in all respects and offer zero benefit to anyone. They create more bureaucracy. Another 6 civil servants, we're told, who will cost the Treasury at least £500,000 a year, every year, and add expense for landlords, which may, in some cases, be passed on to tenants. Government should not impose burdens on any section of the community unless there is some clear public advantage which will come from it. The Minister asks what's the difference between a registration scheme and a licensing scheme. And the starting point is that a licensing scheme is a substantial inroad into personal liberty. At present, if you own a property, you can live in it or you can rent it out. If these regulations come in, you will not be able to rent it out without the consent of the Minister. And how does the Minister decide if you can make use of your own property in that way? Well, he must be satisfied that the application meets the requirements of the scheme. And what is the scheme? The only information about the scheme is in Article 2, which tells us that the scheme's purpose is to ensure the safety of rented dwellings and the health and safety of persons occupying them. That's the only limitation on the Minister's power. A civil servant can look at an old staircase and say, that's a bit steep, that's not safe, somebody could fall down that, or there's a damp patch on that granite property's bedroom wall, that could affect someone's health. No, you can't rent that out. Am I being extreme? Can one trust civil servants to be sensible? When personal liberty is in question, I don't think that one should assume that civil servants will always behave sensibly, because experience tells us that sometimes they don't. This is not light touch regulation. If the scheme required landlords to comply with safety regulations passed by the Assembly, that would be different. But that's not what the Minister's scheme says. It is much more widely expressed. Administrative powers should be tightly drawn so that excessive authority is not conferred on officials. These are not. They are dictatorial powers, enabling interferences with people's right to do what they want to do with their own property in ways which might surprise members. There is then an extraordinary provision in the schedule, and I invite members to look at it. The schedule sets out the standard licence conditions, change of address, contact numbers, and so on. All that is obviously fine. But paragraph 2E, I've got this right, paragraph 2E says that a landlord must also notify the Minister, and I quote, of any other change of circumstance that could lead to the Minister withdrawing the licence. Really? What are those circumstances? How can one know what those circumstances are? But if you fail to notify the Minister of these circumstances, your licence could be taken away. Important as these questions of personal liberty are, is there a public interest in adopting the regulations which outweighs them? The purpose, so the report says, is to allow significant compliance issues to be tackled, making it easier to give effect to minimum standards. This point has been picked up on numerous occasions. The Minister repeated it this morning, and even a leader in the local paper. If the regulations did help to ensure that minimum standards were met, that would certainly be a reason for supporting them. But how will requiring landlords to get a license to rent out property help to ensure minimum standards? The report doesn't tell us, nor does it give any indication of the kind of questions which might be included in the application form. The Minister has been rather coy about that, and I don't understand why the draft application form could not have been attached to the report. It must exist. Why can't we see it? Be that as it may, what the Minister said in answer to my question yesterday was that the scheme would help by giving information about tenancies which would enable inspections of property to take place without disclosing to a landlord that his tenant had complained. He would then be able to do something about substandard rented dwellings. I hope I did not misunderstand his answer yesterday. If that is the reason for bringing in these regulations, it seems to me rather weak and unpersuasive. If a tenant brings a complaint to the attention of the authorities, surely he must expect some action to be taken. I don't accept that you make a complaint to officials just to have it written down. And indeed, if officials become aware of breaches of environmental standards regulations, I think they have a duty to do something about it. The Minister says in his report that many of these complaints cannot be acted upon, and I quote, because of the reluctance of tenants to pursue action against a landlord. It's not for the tenant to take action against the landlord. It's for the Minister and his officials to take action. If the Minister knows of some rental accommodation that is some standard, and it does, and indeed he conceded it in his speech this morning, why has he not done anything about it? He says that there are no adequate means of enforcement, and the only way in which it can be enforced is through a criminal prosecution, and that's very difficult. Well, I don't know whether the Minister has read the 2018 law or not, because it seems very curious that the report quotes Article 5 of that law at length, but does not mention Articles 6, 7, and 12, which contain very wide powers of enforcement. If the Minister knows of premises which are substandard, he can, through any authorised official, inspect and carry out an assessment of the dwelling, issue an improvement notice requiring the landlord to put matters right, and if the remedial action is not taken, he can undertake the work himself and recover that expense from the landlord as a civil debt. So why has that not been done in those cases where the Minister is aware of substandard properties? And why has members' attention not been drawn to these existing enforcement powers in the 2018 law? Those statutory provisions seem to me completely to undermine the justification for these regulations. requiring landlords to get a license to let out property is not going to help to eliminate substandard properties. Firm action using existing enforcement provisions is much more likely to have a salutary effect, and he can do that already. Identifying substandard properties is the key. I'm sure we will all agree on that. But a licensing scheme is not going to do that. Only tenants are likely to provide that information, not landlords. Why does not the Minister use the simple and cheap expedient of installing a confidential helpline in his department where tenants can report their problems with uncooperative landlords to the authorities? Some may be reluctant to use the helpline, but many will not. Sometimes the obvious solution is the best one. As to the argument that landlords might evict a tenant who complains, I have two answers. The first is that although much is made of the so-called problem of revenge evictions, in the Petty Debts Court, where orders for eviction are made, no one has heard of them. I'm not saying that there has never been a vengeful response, but a court official who has sat through most eviction proceedings over the last 9 years has told me that she has never heard a tenant say that the action was one of revenge. Nearly all are cases where rent has not been paid or some other breach of contract has taken place. That is not surprising because, and this is the second point, few landlords would risk behaving in that way, given that the law confers an absolute discretion on the magistrate to delay the execution of an eviction order. Delays of 3 years used to be common, but there is no reason why a delay should not be for 5 years or more in the case of vengeful conduct by a landlord, which would clearly be a relevant matter for the magistrate to consider. And finally, sir, I accept the usefulness of a register of landlords and tenants. It could give accurate information about rents and indeed deter excessive increases. The Jersey Liberal Conservatives have that commitment in their manifesto. Whether the licensing scheme will give us that information about rents, we don't know because we have not seen the application form. However, there is in fact already a register in the form of the Jersey Land and Property Index, which is maintained by the Environment Department. That could sensibly be enhanced, and I would certainly support that. But that is different, as I have said, from a licensing scheme. The Minister claims it would be useful to be able to revoke a license, but that would never in practice be done.
Deputy, you've reached your 15 minutes.
May I have 1 minute to finish, sir?
I don't think that's permitted by the...
I'm sorry?
I don't think that's permitted by the standing order. I think it's a hard 15-minute limit.
Ready?
Deputy Scott?
Sir, may I ask the Attorney-General question?
Yes, sir, I was maybe come to your help. I wonder if we could break for the adjournment now.
It might be helpful to have the question asked now so the Attorney can address it, think about it over the adjournment. Yes, Deputy Scott.
Sir, it's on this question whether the 2018 law under which these regulations are made, I understand the Minister saying that they don't allow random evictions, and I'd like the Attorney-General to just confirm whether that is the case or not. Does the law, without these regulations, allow random inspections?
Do you want to come back to that at 2:15, Mr. Attorney?
I can deal with it now, but I'm happy to do it at 2:15.
I would like to propose the
I
adjournment.
think the adjournment has been proposed by 2 members now. People are members content to adjourn now. Deputy Ferry?
Sir, as we adjourn for lunch, I'd just like to draw to members' attention that there's a Closer to Home event in the Royal Square over lunchtime. Over 30 charities showcasing the great work that they do, everything from Autism Jersey to ICANN, and I would like to ask members to spend a little time and see the great work that local charities do, sir.
Thank you very much. We'll adjourn until 2:15.